Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 7142. Intelligence Support. The worst part of it was that he did so voluntarily. He was supposed to be a mech designer, yet agreed to initiate a leadership challenge against the highest-ranking officers of the Phase Lord Department. Those 4 leaders also happened to be among the most powerful fighters of that very same department, or it was not possible for them to maintain their ranks. The prospect of fighting against them instilled his heart with fear. What if the gap in strength was too big? What if they pulled off a killing blow before he could issue his surrender? What if the Ascended Giants did not respect the rules? There were many uncertainties surrounding the leadership challenge. VS felt as if his mind would explode if he tried to deliberate over them all. There were way too many breaking points. Fortunately, he was not alone in this. Demetrius Solclavia noticed V's growing distress and tried to pull him back to sanity. "You are not alone in this," he said. "You have the broad support of the Red Collective behind you. Our resources, our expertise, and our backing is yours. No matter whether you win or lose, we will not let you suffer unjustly, as you are one of our own. Your loyalty and commitment to the cause is much greater than that of the Ascended Giants. That makes you far more valuable than these body cultivators gone rogue." His words helped to ease V's rational as well as irrational concerns. VS closed his eyes for a moment. "If we are about to do this, then I first need to know what I am dealing with. I have only read descriptions of the Polemarchos and the Strategoi, but that doesn't tell me nearly enough how they fight. We are already preparing information packages that contain footage of their characteristic fighting styles before and after they have transformed into human phase lords," the department head promised. "The encrypted data that your cat had retrieved from their headquarters is continuing to reveal its secrets as we unlock them. This effort has already borne fruit as we have obtained scattered footage of training sessions, ability testing, and instruction classes. The human phase lords are all enthused about their rapidly growing strength and capabilities. They cannot resist the urge to show off their power." VS could understand the sentiment. Unlike him, they were all professional soldiers and warriors. They had long been relatively powerless during the age of mechs. Their poor genetic aptitudes meant that they were unable to join the mech craze and could only get their fix by specializing in personal combat or serve the military in another capacity, such as becoming a staff officer or serving on a carrier vessel. The Phase Lord Department completely remade them. They had turned from weak and puny humans into giants that could crush the average mech with their bare fists. The acquisition of so much power in a matter of months could cause any fighter's ego to inflate. The indoctrination of the heavenly authority of the Red Ocean was insidious enough to feed these impulses. These Ascended Giants did not flirt with defection because they got brainwashed into becoming completely different people. Instead, the influence of the alien galaxy merely amplified their hidden but wildly ambitious thoughts. These heretical ideas should have remained buried in the depths of everyone's minds, but the indoctrination merely brought it forward while almost completely removing any scent of stigma. How the hell was VS supposed to reassert their loyalty to Red humanity? The only answer was to perform convincingly enough in the leadership challenge that no one doubted his strength. To do that, he needed to know what he was dealing with. Intelligence was crucial for him to gain an edge. Zerial 775 here is responsible for presenting our intelligence to you, the chief enforcer said as he gestured to the secret keeper. He is also responsible for conveying your intelligence demands to us. Do not be afraid of asking him questions. One of the reasons why he is assigned to you is because he was one of the secret keepers tasked with monitoring the Phase Lord Department. He possesses greater insights into their thinking than others. Secret Keeper Zerial 775 stepped forward. An important development has occurred. The additional data that we have decrypted from the data cores has yielded a large amount of miscellaneous information. Not much of it is immediately relevant to you, but we have obtained a number of blueprints of Raymond's weapon systems and other gear. Their completeness is not high, but they should give you a better idea of the equipment that you are expected to face. That was incredibly valuable information. VS was able to make much better use of such detailed technical information on account of being a mech designer. He could design his gear with greater certainty that they would counter whatever his enemies carried into battle. Of course, who knew whether the Polemarchos and the Strategoi prepared a secret set of equipment that was different or much more powerful than usual? VS could not assume that every piece of intelligence was reliable. What about their phase water organs? VS asked. We can indirectly piece together a number of phase water organs that they have integrated into their true body. The secret keeper responded. We do not have direct access to medical records or other intelligence that can help us gain a more complete overview of their phase water organs. That data is locked within more secure data cores as it should. That made a lot of sense. This was disappointing news. VS knew that there were phase water organs that could do a lot of weird stuff. It would be nice for him to know what he was dealing with beforehand. He may even be able to build a special gadget that could counter a specific function. That said, we are not completely reliant on the data core to glean enemy intelligence. Your formation master may be able to supply more answers. The farcer who had remained quiet all of this time finally stepped forward. The headquarters of the Phase Lord Department is quite secure and is meant to block any intrusion no matter whether it is physical or through other means. However, the defenses and countermeasures of the base built on the surface of Jotunheim have not been updated in months. In contrast, my scrying methods are constantly growing. My methods are also more effective with more intelligent support. Oh, scrying becomes easier when you have a fairly complete and up-to-date map of the headquarters. It also becomes easier if you have access to images and footage of the interior as well as the personnel residing within. You can think of every packet of information as a partial coordinate. Collect one of them and I narrow the range and precision of my scrying by a noticeable margin. Collect enough of them to complete the coordinates and I can lock onto specific individuals and locations with a higher degree of precision. That made scrying a lot more practical and useful. VS could think of many ways to make good use of the intelligence gathered through remote viewing. Wait, VS suddenly frowned. Does this work against us as well? The farcer nodded. Yes, but there are methods to protect against it. We are constantly developing new wards, chi formations, and other countermeasures that can block against it. You do not have to worry about the Tarask or most other vessels in the Blue Jay fleet. We have already been working together with the Red Association and the Red Fleet to implement numerous safeguards. The flagship is especially well protected due to housing you and your family. However, you should not put your absolute trust in our countermeasures as there are cultivators who are constantly developing better ways to spy on others. The intelligence game used to center around the development of technology. Spying gadgets and technological countermeasures had been locked in an arms race for multiple millennia. From the start of the Age of Dawn, Red humanity expanded this competition to encompass the endless possibilities of systematic cultivation. In order to show VS what she could do with intelligence support, the farcer brought forth her iconic astral mirror. The surface of the proto-high-level artifact flickered and shimmered until it displayed a large and cavernous training area. Around a dozen ascended giants were milling about. VS recognized two of them sparring and exchanging words in the large and shielded sparring ring. We can finally see our progenitor in action. Do not expect much from him. Just a mech designer. No one can defeat our Polemarchos, not even the progenitor. Don't underestimate the divine harpoon. He hasn't shown off his power in a long time. The scattered conversations already provided VS with a better understanding of the Phase Lord Department. Of course, all of this hearsay may not be completely reliable, but they could be used to verify intelligence gathered from other sources such as the data cores. What VS found important was the conversation taking place between the two sparring ascended giants in the center. The strategos and the champion of the flesh chopper phalanx initiated a fierce exchange of blows with practice axes. These axes were smaller than VS expected, but that also enabled the ascended giants to wield them deftly and with greater speed and precision. It was fascinating to see them dance around each other. They preferred to evade rather than block. Their speed was also quite amazing, even when considering their modest scale of 2 times the height of a mech. Lend me your borrowed plasma X. Phasia Melator spoke. The mass allowance allows me to carry an extra weapon. I need to carry yours as backup and in order to prepare for what is necessary. Arkade Androwix, otherwise known as the Plasma Axe, furrowed his large brows after hearing this request. You never had any desire to borrow my Plasma Axe in the past. It handles quite differently from your fiery axe. It is not made to wield in your palms. That is okay. I do not intend to rely on it to defeat our progenitor. I intend to rely on it to land a killing blow in case he proves to be too disappointing. I know that the lethality of your Plasma Axe is higher than my own weapon if I briefly overload its plasma edge. I will never let a weakling lead our race. Even if he is the reason for our existence. Let him become remembered for his contribution to our race. The female ascended giant spoke with conviction. There is no way a mech designer of all people is a serious martial contender. Mark my words. He will shame our race by putting on a pathetic performance. Rather than let him disgrace our race further, I will honor his memory by ending his life by my own hands. Let me cut off his existence so that he will not live long enough to disappoint our race. The Plasma Axe's expression remained neutral. I cannot say whether I would make the same decision as you, but you will have my Plasma Axe if that is what you need. How do you ensure you can kill our progenitor before he surrenders? With my latest phase water organ. The fiery axe smirked. You know what it is capable of. My strength has soared since it settled into my body. I will hold myself back and keep it in reserve until the time has come. I do not think I will need to rely on it to defeat our progenitor anyhow. He is not a fighter. VS and the others quietly listened to the conversations that the astral mirror magically conveyed through an unknown method. This fiery axe wants to kill me if I don't put up a good fight. VS flatly said. What a pleasant woman. I thought she was a more moderate ascended giant from the information I received before, but it appears she is just as crazy as the others. Chapter 7143. Giant Ambition. The Farser was one of the most competent scryers of the Red Collective. She was not able to observe the entire headquarters due to complications deeper within the planetary base, but she was still able to catch plenty of glimpses elsewhere. They did so with the help of formation anchors that had been secretly planted underneath the surface of Jotunheim. The Ascended Giants did not have perfect control over their icy planet. The collies successfully snuck formation anchors and listening devices all across the planet, though they did not dare to bring anything too big and powerful for fear of detection. The compromised personnel still retained their skills and knowledge even if their views had changed. In any case, Andrea Voss, along with other scryers, would continue to monitor the Ascended Giants as they prepared to participate or witness the ritualistic challenge. Not everyone was easy to read as the fiery axe. The scryers failed to observe the oscillating fist and only caught fleeting glimpses of the unshakable king. The latter was a key figure. He was the leader that most strongly fell for the illusion that phase lords were gods. This led him to believing that he could only realize his ambition of being treated as a god if he defected to the Red Cabal. Suffice to say, if VS could accomplish just one goal during the leadership challenge, it was to find a way to not only defeat the unshakable king but kill him before he could spread his poison any further among his fellow Ascended Giants. VS felt quite troubled by this task. As the Tarask temporarily withdrew from Jotunheim's orbit and flew to a different location in order to solve a necessary problem, the scryers and the other collies that in place managed to gather a crucial piece of intelligence. The unshakable king seeks to claim your head as well. Zerial 775 quietly reported to VS. We do not have absolute certainty that this is true, but we deem that it is over 85% likely that. VS didn't know how to feel about this. That makes 2 out of 4. What is his motivation behind his desire to kill me? Does he have similar sentiments to the fiery axe? Not quite. Zerial 775 responded. His ambitions are stronger than his pride. The unshakable king is convinced that human phase lords deserve to be treated as gods, and he prefers to be the greatest god among his kind. According to the intelligence we have gathered, he is not that hopeful that he will be able to defeat the oscillating fist. This is why he is aiming at your head. He is motivated by the bounty on your head. He knows that if he is able to kill you and present himself before the Red Cabal, the phase whales will welcome him with open fins. The native aliens will regard the unshakable king as a hero and treat him much more favorably than the other Ascended Giants. He may even be appointed as their leader. VS raised his eyebrows. He quickly recognized the political brilliance of this scheme. The leader of the UR Titan phalanx must be really lacking in confidence in his ability to compete fairly against the oscillating fist. Since the unshakable king can't become the most powerful god through martial might, then it is pretty clever for him to maneuver his way to the top through political scheming. It isn't as honorable, but the native aliens don't care so long as he is able to present my head to them. The phase whales have no choice but to honor their earlier commitment and help the unshakable king promote to a greater phase lord. As long as the unshakable king became the first greater phase lord among the Ascended Giants, all of his gigantic brothers and sisters had no choice but to acknowledge him as their absolute leader. Not even the oscillating fist would be able to rely on his exquisite boxing skills to overcome the enormous gap between lesser phase lords and greater phase lords. The good news is that none of the other leaders are motivated by the bounty. For the time being, the secret keeper said. Most of the Ascended Giants still respect you and look up to you for enabling their own physical transformations. Do not underestimate this sentiment. For various reasons, all of the members of the Phase Lord Department have undergone a radical culture change. They may still harbor diverse opinions in private, but when it comes to official matters they have a tendency to form a united front and obey their superiors without question. The human Phase Lords, as well as their mortal servants, have become much more hierarchical than in the past. We are uncertain why this is the case. That sounded odd to VS as well. I have been thinking about this unusual phenomenon as well. Do you think that a third party has intervened in secret? We are increasingly suspicious that this is the case. Secret Keeper Zerial 775 responded in a morose tone. One of the reasons why we are monitoring the headquarters so closely is because we want to find proof of third-party intervention. We currently suspect that the cosmopolitan movement has secretly fanned the flames by providing them with covert assistance. That sounded entirely plausible. The cosmopolitans were probably salivating to introduce the Ascended Giants to the Red Cabal. In a sense, the Ascended Giants represent the ideal that the cosmopolitans were working towards. The crazy ideologues wanted humans to assimilate into alien society. What better way to do that than to elevate a human version of the kind of ruling class that the native aliens were accustomed with? The Ascended Giants would be able to fit right into alien society. With the cosmopolitan movement acting as lubricant, the probability that this would happen was much greater. I am not about to present my head to the unshakable king, so that he could turn it into his trophy and present it to the Red Cabal. VS said with growing determination. That said, beating him or just avoiding death is a tall order. The unshakable king is regarded as the second strongest Ascended Giant after the Oscillating Fist, correct? The Secret Keeper nodded. That is what the Ascended Giants believe. Whether that is true or not remains to be seen. The Oscillating Fist has never lost a challenge and has deterred his strategoi from mounting one in the foreseeable future. We do not have a good overview of how much progress the Unshakable King has made, as he remains unchallenged within his own unit. We can only rely on less reliable and outdated sources to build up a model of his fighting style. So what should I expect if I duel against the head of the UR Titan Phalanx? The UR Titans enjoy some of the best equipment issued to human phase lords, and their strategos only more so. The UR Titans excel in defense and always wear the heaviest possible raiments that they can get away with. Their defenses are formidable. This is their focus, as they were partially meant to serve escort and bodyguard duties. Their speed is obviously not a strong focus, but the rules of the leadership challenge discourages avoidance, so do not think you can win by running circles around the Unshakable King. You will have to confront him head-on if you want to earn the respect of the Ascended Giants, but this is where the danger lies. In other words, VS needed to strengthen his offensive power and make sure he wielded a highly penetrating weapon in order to overcome the Unshakable King's formidable defenses. If he failed to meet this requirement, then there was no hope of winning the duel. I understand, he said. I think it is best if I wield a spear. The extra reach will allow me to maintain my distance from this powerful but relatively slow monster. It is also easier to punch through armor with a spear than with most other weapons. I think it might be possible to attain better results with a war pick, but I don't think I can wield this armament with any level of proficiency in a short amount of time. He was most familiar with wielding the staff and by extension other polearms. He had no real skill at unarmed combat, and other weapons were pretty much foreign to him. The only way to remedy this was to swallow an enlightenment fruit that just happened to impart the right skills. A simple strategy will not suffice against an opponent of this caliber, counselor. The Unshakable King is regarded as the second strongest Ascended Giant for good reasons. Even if he has not demonstrated his strength all that often, you should understand that his high rank and prestige grants him greater access to Phasewater custom gear and Phasewater organs. He understands his strengths and weaknesses very well. He should have prepared countermeasures against an opponent that is reluctant to get close. We are trying our best to uncover his secrets, but he is considerably more disciplined in how much information he reveals than others. The lack of intelligence made VS wary of this opponent. He did not like uncertainty. The less he knew, the more ways the Unshakable King could surprise him in the dueling field. Given that death was a very real possibility in these duels, any mistake could prove fatal. VS continued to peruse the intelligence supplied by the Secret Keeper. Not all pieces of information were reliable or relevant to him. Despite the best efforts of the Secret Department, they could not confirm everything, so VS still needed to employ his own judgment and consider whether the Ascended Giants were playing a high-level deception campaign against their observers. The Tarask finally reached one of the many asteroid bases that had been built across the Yernstall Central Star Node. The abundance of stars and planets had a powerful regulating effect on asteroid belts and the likes. Yernstall hosted many more asteroid belts and asteroid fields than usual. These were good places to hide different ships and bases, as it was unreasonable for anyone to deep scan every single section of every collection of asteroids. VS teleported over to one such secret base with his RC entourage in tow. He proceeded to go through a fairly extensive physical examination before being led to a ritual chamber prepared by the Red Collective. Ritualists and other strange figures were still at work with painting symbols on the walls and carving runes into the deck. At the same time, engineers were installing a range of protective and restraining equipment, all tailor-made to suppress a phase lord. VS noticed with a bit of wariness that the collies had forged a sizable collection of chains and shackles out of mid-grade superdimensional matter. Each of them had already been carved with runes and embedded with a variety of hypermaterials that provided different enhancements. This was a crude but effective way to suppress a phase lord. He wondered what all of the other ritualistic characteristics were for. They seemed almost redundant. These rituals perform a variety of different functions. Andrea Voss explained to VS. They will attempt to calm your alter ego and reduce his hostility. The rituals will also help with keeping you conscious and aware by empowering and anchoring your companion's spirit. We do not have to address you one at a time. We can speak to both of you at the same time. Additionally, we can give you the opportunity to speak with your other personality directly. One way or another, the two of you need to reconcile and make peace with each other's existence. VS did not like the sound of that at all. Is there an alternative? I do not believe that this is the only option you guys have prepared. You should have contingencies in place. We do, but the results are not as promising. The Farser replied. We have conducted more studies on the phenomenon that you are bothered with. Some of our bolder analysts have proposed a compelling theory. What does this theory entail? Sev is not a foreign personality that has been planted into you by a powerful third party. He is actually an aspect of yourself that you suppress so deeply that you have never acknowledged its existence. There is a part of you that actually delights in the views espoused by your other self. You secretly love power and like nothing more than to be treated and worshipped like a god. That is a crap theory. I will not even deign to entertain it with a response. The formation master gave him an unreadable look. It is true that we still lack too much empirical data to verify this theory and other theories. The upcoming process shall hopefully yield us enough data to prove or disprove our assumptions about your condition. V's mood darkened. There was no way he believed in this outrageous theory. It was easy for people to look on the outside and come up with all sorts of easy explanations, but proving them is another matter. Hopefully VS would be able to find out just how extensively Sev mirrored himself. Chapter 7144. The Self-Showdown. The time had come for a showdown. VS had already changed into a nanosuit. It was fairly thick at its current size, but he was sure that it would stretch to a thin layer once he realized his full size. He was having second thoughts about unfolding his true body though. Although he knew that it was best to confront Sev under controlled circumstances, what if that was not enough? What if Sev decided to stick around and couldn't be stuffed back in the bottle? Yet, if he continued to postpone this operation, it would continue to haunt his thoughts. He was also afraid that the problem would only grow worse over time. If his phase lord cultivation advanced even further, Sev would grow stronger and gain more leverage. From a logical perspective, it was best to deal with Sev when he was still weak and incapable of relying on force to break his way out of all of the restraints. VS eyed the superdimensional shackles and chains with great suspicion. Am I supposed to put them on? He asked. Yes. The farcer said. Do not worry. We will move them across your body by remote control. We only ask you to remain still so that we can minimize the variables. The next steps will proceed much smoother if there is no need for our mechs to step in and teach Sev a lesson. The shackles should be effective at restraining a lesser phase lord like Sev. The same could be said for VS. If he ever lost the support of red humanity and turned into a wanted criminal, superdimensional shackles could easily be used to confine him and make sure he stayed in place. The Kalis had not forgotten about his ability to manipulate E-energy radiation either. The walls of the ritual chamber contained plenty of dampening material similar to stone that was able to block the passage of E-energy radiation. The only E-energy that was allowed to circulate in this protected chamber came from hypermaterials and other controlled sources. The Kalis wanted to leave as little to chance as possible. Only by holding all of the cards would they be able to corner Sev into accepting a compromise. VS let out a nervous breath as he tried to shove these uncomfortable thoughts away. Let's get this over with. Where should I stand? A gaggle of Kalis led him to the right position. VS stared closely at the superdimensional restraints and experienced existential fear. There was no way he could break out of them by relying on his own power. Most tech and materials would not be able to do more than scratch them. Superdimensional matter and technology was too well positioned as a counter against phase lords and many other subjects for that matter. Many people began to retreat from the ritual chamber. All of the painted and carved symbols seemed to create a strained atmosphere. VS already felt affected by them despite the fact that barely any E-energy circulated along the ritual circles. Chief Counselor, we have completed our preparations. The voice of the farcer transmitted from the overhead speakers. Get ready and unfold your true body. As you do, make sure to maintain a strong connection to your companion spirit. Blinky should give you a measure of awareness and control even as your other personality is roused. You may begin whenever you are ready. VS took a few more measured breaths before he decided to pull the trigger. There was not much point in procrastinating any further. He overcame his strong resistance against this move and began to unfold his body like he did in the past. As the mass and dimensions of his body began to enlarge, his nanosuit automatically adjusted to keep him covered. At the same time, the chain shackles came to life. They lifted off the floor and began to assume the right positions. Though VS still felt in control over his body, that rapidly began to fade once he reached a certain threshold. A part of VS strongly urged him to stop and turn back before it was too late. It took an even greater amount of courage and conscious effort for him to break past his renewed hesitation and firmly put his fate in the hands of the Kalis. I have returned. Sev victoriously crowed as he came to possess the true body yet again. Behold my ascended giants. Your God King has arrived and he's release me. You are abusing your only savior. Sev's arrogant tone immediately turned indignant as the superdimensional restraints locked onto his form. Thick superdimensional shackles captured his wrists and ankles in an instant. The chains attached to them started to get pulled into multiple directions. Sev's gigantic form immediately started to lose footing. The phase lord fell to his knees while his arms got pulled behind his back. This was a profoundly humiliating pose. Unhand me. You dare touch your god. This is a travesty. Oh, shut up, you idiot. I can't believe that you were born from my body. With the help of the ritual circles and other support, a larger and more empowered version of Blinky emerged from the human phase lord's head. The RC managed to pull it off. VS felt as if his consciousness had temporarily shifted over to Blinky. Although his alter ego tried his best to pull Blinky back and stuff him in a deep dark hole, that did not work this time. The entire ritual chamber was working all of the subversive personality's attempts to assert control. You. Sev spoke with vitriol as he recognized VS right away. You are a weakling and a failure. Your complete inability to embrace your destiny has set you back in ways you cannot imagine. What is so great about being a mech designer when you have to work so hard only to let others steal all of the glory with the help of your works? What is so wrong about working for yourself? You have yet to make a Carmine mech for yourself. I am working on it, you imbecile. If you are a part of myself, then you should know that already. You could have become a god if you realized how much greater you have become, but still you cling to your identity as a human as if you are suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. These weaklings are holding you back from achieving greatness. It is no surprise that I have come into existence. I am the strength that you deny. Blinky or VS grew furious. Sev stood against all of his values and principles. How the hell were they supposed to accept and play nice when they had nothing in common? Fortunately, VS was not by himself. The farcer began to speak through the speakers. Mr. Sev, it is a distinct pleasure to be graced by your presence. Let us dispense with the posturing. We are aware that you know everything that VS knows. You should understand why we have given you an opportunity to appear. Let us set aside your many differences with us and VS. Let us focus on a goal that we all wish to realize. How do you feel about becoming the department head of the Phase Lord department? The allure of this possibility was so strong that Sev became a lot more serious. You are too presumptuous, mortal. Even if you have correctly identified a point of interest of mine, you should at least give me the courtesy of using the correct terms. The Ascended Giants have chosen their own name. Use it. Do not refer them to their mortal names. Now that we are on this subject, you should call me by my real name, not the Sev that you have foisted upon me without much thought. The disgust in the Phase Lord's voice was obvious to everyone. Sev felt so strongly about it that he gave off the impression that he would withhold his cooperation unless the others indulged his requests. The Formation Master remained silent for a moment. The Collies must probably be deliberating on whether they should meet the Phase Lord's request at the cost of showing weakness. VS already made up his own mind. I don't like you, but I am willing to be reasonable with you. I only hope that you can reciprocate my gesture. What alternative name have you chosen for yourself? Sev grinned as he turned as best as his restraints allowed. The Phase Lord stared at Blinky as if he wanted to devour the spiritual cat. My chosen name is the Dark Apostle. VS did not like this choice. He immediately had the urge to veto this choice. It was only because he needed to take the greater mission into account that he held this impulse back. VS had a few ideas why Sev chose this moniker. Perhaps the main reason why Sev chose this moniker was to tweak his cowardly human counterpart. I am not sure whether you have made the right choice. Blinky carefully said. An apostle is the envoy of a more powerful god or existence. Adopting this name means that you already put yourself underneath another being. That is true, but so what? I worship supreme power. You have touched it yourself once upon a time. When you learned how to wield the power of darkness with adequate proficiency, you glimpsed the fundamental truth that is hidden to most gods and mortals. They have no understanding of the sinister existence that threatens to unmake all life. How can you not be awed by such strength? It is an honor to tap into this dark power and learn how to wield it to exact destruction on our enemies. Besides, who says I am content to remain an apostle? My new name is not permanent. One day I shall rise up and supplant that supreme existence. VS almost couldn't believe what he heard. The Dark Apostle? Or whatever was talking complete nonsense. The Dark Apostle self-defense manual fruit had taught him how to channel the power of darkness through staff techniques, but it also came with a lot of religious nonsense. Unfortunately, not all of it was complete fantasy. The Dark Apostles were missionaries of a vast and unknowable force of darkness that lurked in the depths of the universe. Suffice to say, this dark entity was not benign. Few people appreciated it when a Dark Apostle walked up to them and tried to convert them into worshipping this nihilistic force of nature. The entire point of this self-defense manual was to help a Dark Apostle survive the backlash of his own proselytizing. VS wanted nothing to do with the dark existence that was associated with the self-defense manual. Unfortunately, the Sev had different ideas. Please reconsider. No, you won't earn much respect from the Ascended Giant if you don't assume a domineering enough name. Blinky argued. I mean, just think of what others call themselves. There is the oscillating fist, which evokes the vision of your body getting shaken to pieces if you are struck by one of his fists. Then there is the unshakable king. He sounds as if he is invincible while not being too blatant and direct about it. Then there is you, the Dark Apostle. You sound like you are a student rather than a champion that has earned the right to lead the ascended giants. The Phase Lord tried to move his arms, but his shackles kept them behind his back. He opted to smirk. A student is at the start of his journey. I still have room to grow. One day in the future I shall crown myself a king, but that day has not yet come. Even I am not as presumptuous as the unshakable king, who has already claimed a crown despite transcending his mortality in a year. The Dark Apostle refused to change his decision. For better or worse, the others had little choice but to accept this new name if they wanted any hope of working together with this conceited personality. Chapter 71:45. To share or not to share. VS let his alter ego claim his childish victory. He may call himself the Dark Apostle or the Dark Idiot all he wanted so long as he made concessions of his own in return. As V's true body remained in a kneeled and shackled position, the newly renamed Dark Apostle looked inordinately proud for having everyone recognize his chosen moniker. Given that he was in a good mood right now, VS decided to strike while the iron was hot and voice his key proposal. We do not need to be enemies with each other. VS spoke through Blinky's manifestation. Look, I know that neither of us like each other. In fact, I would be more than happy if I can get rid of you, and I believe that you harbor the same intentions. That is not going to happen though. For better or worse, we are stuck as one body sharing at least two distinct versions of ourselves. Rather than complain about it, I would rather do something productive like forming a mutually beneficial arrangement. The Dark Apostle sneered. Why should I cooperate with you? I hate you. I despise your weakness. I loathe your continued insistence on sympathizing with these mortals. At least the woman known as the Polymath has the right idea. Humans are incapable of ruling themselves, so they need a guiding hand, and who better to undertake this responsibility than gods? The Cybernetic Empress is a god in all but name. I admire how extensively she has taken control over the richest star system in this dwarf galaxy. She is proof that even a mech designer can become a qualified god. Why couldn't you be more like your idol? She is not my idol. VS defended himself, causing Blinky's fur to puff up. I respect and admire her knowledge and her many innovations, but that is the extent of my respect for her. When it comes to statecraft and other stuff, she is a horrible person. The Polymath has strayed from the goals and intentions that mech designers hold sacred. We are not talking about her today. We are talking about ourselves. We need to form a resolution that both of us can accept. You talk about us as if we can truly become a team. The Dark Apostle frowned. That will never happen. Just as you think of me as a usurper, I think of you as a stubborn vestige that has refused to make way for the superior version, namely myself. Everything you do goes against my views. I can imagine that the same applies to you as well. Any deal we make will end up in a situation where the two of us counteract each other. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case, Dark Apostle. VS responded while referring to his alter ego by his preferred name rather than the one that reminded him of his human side. Look, I have been thinking about this a bit more. Time is precious to me. The more time I give up on other stuff, the less I am able to contribute to society. However, so long as giving up a few hours of my time per week can keep you happy and productive, I am open to letting you out and control my body so long as you behave. You will have to agree to strict monitoring. Mechs that are especially equipped to neutralize your ability to do anything harmful will shadow you everywhere. However, as long as you don't do anything stupid and stay away from my own business, I can tolerate your existence. The human Phase Lord raised his eyebrow. For all of your complaints that you do not resemble the Polymath in the slightest, I know you crave control. You bear a great hatred for factors that are outside of your control. In your eyes, I am one of them. I can do anything while I am in control of your body. Are you truly willing to let me out and do with this body as I will? Blinky shook his head. Do not misrepresent my words. I have told you that you will be given a set of our rules to follow. The members of the Blue Jay fleet will accompany you and watch your every move in case you step out of line. You are not given a carte blanche. Threaten my people and they will put you back in the shackles that currently restrain you, understand? The human Phase Lord scowled after hearing all of those restrictions. It galled him to be bossed around by weak and pathetic mortal humans. From his perspective, everything was upside down. The weak ruled over the powerful. Unfortunately, the Dark Apostle did not get to have a say over how society should be run. Human civilization was too big and strong for him to overturn it all at once. Outside of exceptions such as the Polymath, regular humans still ruled large parts of human society. Fortunately, everything could change. The Dark Apostle recognized that this might not be the right time to assert all of his rights. Too few years had passed since the start of the Age of Dawn. Many changes needed a lot more time to work their way across red humanity. The better strategy would be for him to remain patient and promote incremental changes to society. In order to do that, he had to play along with these weak mortals and make the best use out of his parole time or whatever. A calculating expression appeared on his face as he contemplated his new game plan. While he preferred to solve this problem directly and through violence, his disadvantages were so severe that he had little choice but to follow the current arrangements. That did not mean he was willing to roll over and accept every condition that these weaklings imposed on him. He was a phase lord, no, an ascended giant. He had his own pride just like all of the other ascended giants. Give me 40 hours of the week to train and do my thing, he demanded. 40 hours. That is way too much. I am asking for no more than the hours that a normal person spends on sleep, if they are not consumed by work and study. You already squander at least several hours a day on maintaining a normal sleep cycle as if you are still human, which you are very much not. You know as well as I do that your need for sleep is mostly a self-imposed one at this point. For whatever reason, you depend on the daily sleep cycle to maintain a vestige of your fading humanity. My proposal will not change. You will still be allowed to go to sleep. I just happen to regain control of the body that you have usurped from me and lead the ascended giants. You should feel grateful that I am still leaving you with most of the hours of the week. The Dark Apostle already recognized that VS would never accept a demand that would give him control over what he considered his own true body for a longer period of time. Even if they acted as separate people, they still shared the same body and brain after all. They both had a good understanding of each other's views and opinions. Just as the human phase lord knew that VS would not tolerate any heavier demands, VS also recognized that the Dark Apostle's bottom line was not too flexible. 30 hours. Hell number 40 hours or the deal is off. I will not allow you to treat me like a mental order that is allowed to run its course for a few hours a day. I am an ascended giant. I deserve respect. They went back and forth a few times, but the Dark Apostle dug his heels, willing to bet that his harsh demand would eventually get accepted. VS and the Kalis needed his cooperation. Their alternatives for handling the Phase Lord department were all worse. They slowly arrived at a middle ground that both of them could reluctantly accept. I will give you your damn 40 hours, but aside from subjecting you to strict monitoring from the Blue Jay fleet, you will not do anything to impersonate me or meddle into my affairs. You will especially stay away from my family. At the same time, I will try to leave the Phase Lord department alone as much as possible, and let you lead it, but only as long as your orders and intentions are reasonable. The Red Collective must be allowed to put their own men into the department in order to monitor its operations and ensure that it will continue its original mandate, which is to protect Red humanity. I agree with most of your demands, but I do not agree with letting you keep me from my family. They may still be weak and vulnerable mortals, but they are still mine as well as yours. Hell no. I will not subject them to the confusion of dealing with the two of us. Do not touch my wife, and especially do not touch my children. They are mere humans anyway. There is no reason for you to build up a relationship with them. My wife and children are off limits, do you understand? I will make sure that the forces of the Blue Jay fleet will shackle you and deprive you of your control over our true body if you ever step over the line. At least let me get in touch with Andraste. Out of all of our children, she has the greatest potential to become a god without peer. She only needs guidance and motivation. Blinky looked really angry at this time. Rejected. When I tell you to stay away from my family, I mean all of them, including Andraste. She will never follow your footsteps. Faced with all of this opposition, the Dark Apostle finally chose to take a step back, but not in a direction that VS and the others had anticipated. An unsettling grin suddenly appeared on the true body's face. If you insist on keeping your family to yourself, then it is only fair to give me the opportunity to start my own family. Blinky appeared completely speechless. VS almost couldn't believe what he just heard. Are you for real? Completely. Do you want my cooperation? Fine. You want me to refrain from breaking the pathetic mortals around me? Fine. You want to keep me away from your precious wife and children? Fine. I will do all of that as long as you accept my needs as well. There are female phase lords among the ascended giants, though not as many as I wish. Regardless, let me approach them and start a relationship with one of them. Or maybe more. Let me marry them and see if we can have children of our own. Give me this right, and I will abide by the terms you have mentioned as honestly as possible. After all, why should I violate them and risk losing my access to my own family? What a clever bastard. VS understood what the Dark Apostle was after. The right to start a relationship with a hopefully female phase lord would give VS and the Red Collective greater leverage. His wife and any children that they may have, though VS had never heard of the possibility of two phase lords being able to procreate naturally, could be used to guarantee the Dark Apostle's good behavior. It was a stable and reliable means of keeping this arrogant alter ego in check, but only if he genuinely cared about his family. VS would be able to tell. After all, the Dark Apostle was his other personality and occupied the same body. This was a surprisingly elegant means to build up trust between the different parties. The Dark Apostle adapted quickly to reality and proposed a solution that ensured that he would continue to enjoy limited freedom 40 hours a week for a long time. It was pretty much the best outcome he could aim for when anything better would get shot down in an instant. While VS could see how this could work from a purely logical perspective, his emotions were in turmoil. He couldn't quite accept a reality where the Dark Apostle would use his time allowance to spend time with another lover. Chapter 71, 46, 40 hours. Chapter 71, 46, 40 hours. The negotiation between the Dark Apostle and VS progressed smoother than expected. That did not mean that both sides got hung up over a few outrageous demands. To VS, the thought of surrendering 40 standard hours per standard week sounded like an intolerable surrender of autonomy. Why should he give up so much precious time when he was doing fine when he ignored his alter ego's existence? The Dark Apostle did not think so. He graciously let VS retain ownership of the 128 hours of the remainder of the week. He had made an enormous concession by giving up any attempt at establishing a more equitable distribution. Quit complaining, you weakling. If I had my way, I would have demanded you give me 84 hours of time to control our divinely sculpted body, but your many friends would probably object to that. 40 hours is my only demand as well as my bottom line. If you do not give me enough time to actually enjoy this life that the heavens bestowed upon me, then we may as well call off the deal right away, because I would know that you have no intention of treating me sincerely. 40 hours is the minimum of uptime that I deserve for not trying to usurp control. VS had little choice but to accept this sum if he wanted the Dark Apostle to play along. The repercussions were great, especially if the alternate personality started to walk around with a giant version of his own face. He would have to inform a lot of people and make sure they could distinguish who was dominant at any time. In order to claw back a measure of control, VS began to demand access and control over the Phase Lord department. No matter whether you call yourself the Dark Apostle, you will be running around with my face and true body. As far as the public is concerned, VS Larkinson has become the department head of the Phase Lord department. This should at least give me a measure of control over the Ascended Giants. Look, I will do my best to avoid stepping on your toes when it comes to your own arrangements, but I want to be involved in the decision-making concerning R&D into phase water organs and the kind of assignments that the Ascended Giants should undertake. No, they are ours. My name is on the records. Those who remain ignorant of our condition will assume that I am in charge. I want to be at least partially truthful when I deal with these people. Besides, I do not think that anyone can ever trust a human Phase Lord with an ideology as radical as yours with complete control over the Phase Lord department. Give me partial authority and the Red Collective will rest much easier. The two haggled a lot on how to share authority over the Phase Lord department. The outcome eventually favored the solutions proposed by VS, if only slightly. The deal they made about the department was a bit complex and lacked definition. They just made a general agreement that the Dark Apostle was the overall leader, while VS turned into a vice leader of sorts, who could issue a large range orders to the mortal staff but possessed much more limited authority when it came to commanding the Ascended Giants. In order to help VS gain more control over the less exciting parts of the Phase Lord department, the Dark Apostle had to permit the RC to insert a lot more handpicked staff into the hierarchy of the Phase Lord department. The infusion of new blood that had not been brainwashed would ensure that the middle and lower ranks of the department would remain in line with the policies of the Red Collective. The reason why VS felt so keen on this demand was because he wanted to make sure he could steer the Phase Lord department by managing its staff. This was a rather sneaky way for VS as well as other RC leaders such as the Patient Builder to exert control over the Phase Lord department. The Dark Apostle was most definitely smart and observant enough to be aware of this trick, but he did not put up too many objections. It was not always the best idea to point out hidden traps and implicit concessions. Both sides were better off if they left certain arrangements unspoken. The Dark Apostle proved to be quite good at judging what he could get away with. The strategic value of the Phase Lord department was great. With a roster of 361 human Phase Lords, anyone who controlled the department held enough martial might to reconquer half a zone from the native aliens. Given how much destructive power he may have at his disposal, soon a degree of oversight and supervision was mandatory if the Dark Apostle wanted to remain in the good books of the Red Collective. He hated the RC very much for being so fractured and so deferential to mortals, but he knew that cooperating with the Collies was a necessary evil if he wanted to keep his ambitions alive. The Dark Apostle was astute enough to realize that it would not be great if the Ascended Giants became isolated from the rest of Red humanity. The human Phase Lords needed access to lots of phase water high-tech products, logistical support, and more. He and his men would be able to grow considerably faster and gain more influence in the Red Ocean if the RC kept fulfilling their needs. In order to make that possible, the Dark Apostle forced himself to let the weak and pathetic humans take care of logistics and other tedious affairs. He reluctantly agreed that VS and the officers of the RC embedded into the hierarchy would be able to steer the Phase Lord department in various ways, most notably by direct contradiction had to be avoided at all costs, but was that truly possible? Neither VS nor the Dark Apostle thought so. There were just too many areas where both could butt heads against each other. This is not going to be an easy agreement to uphold. It is still better than the alternatives. This was a messy agreement that could lead to fights between VS and his alter ego down the line. They had little choice but to deal with those problems when they occurred. All that mattered right now was to form an initial consensus. Who exactly controlled the Phase Lord department and what they were allowed to do could be refined over time. There was no need to take every unlikely scenario into account at the start. In the end, the Dark Apostle was happy enough that he would still be able to command the Ascended Giants, who were the only individuals that mattered. VS was happy enough that he could steer the development of the Phase Lord department and make sure that his other self did not completely lead it astray. There is one more subject we need to discuss. And what is that? Blinky began to circle above the human Phase Lord's head. Battle. Assuming that I win the leadership challenge and take control over the Ascending Giants, I cannot send them off into battle while I remain in the rear. If I want to maintain my authority over them, I have to step onto the battlefield in person and inspire them with my strength. If I do not do so, they will mount another leadership challenge in time. That caused multiple colleagues to frown. This was a very serious issue. VS also did not like what he heard. I am not eager to throw my true body onto the battlefield, especially in situations where it is not needed. I do not care how you feel, weakling. What matters is that when a serious fight takes place, you should take a step back and let me take charge over our body. I can contribute much more on the battlefield than a mech designer like you. It is not as if you have a habit of designing and fabricating mechs mid-battle. Your work is only relevant before and after a battle has occurred. I have no problem with what you do during those times. Just give me control during the rare times when my forces and yours enter into a conflict against serious opponents. Though VS did not like it, the Dark Apostle raised a few good points. There were not a lot of logical arguments that VS could bring up to counter his alter ego's arguments. A mech designer was not supposed to participate directly in combat, but it was a different story for a human Phase Lord. Ugh, fine. I will let you take control when we are involved in a battle. However, I don't want you to push me out entirely. The collies are currently working on a solution that will allow me to maintain my awareness and continue to use Blinky as a vessel outside of this ritual chamber. This is one of the special measures that is designed to give us an advantage when we start the leadership challenge. Both of us have to work together in order to defeat at least 2 out of the 4 leaders of the Ascended Giants. The ritual chamber was both a stopgap measure as well as a testing platform. The Formation Masters, Ritualists, and other Chi cultivators were currently gathering a lot of data about VS and the Dark Apostle's current state. The hope was to discard everything that was either unnecessary or did not work and compress the stuff that did work into a much smaller and more portable tool. Whether they would be able to complete this tool in time remained to be seen. If the collies failed to make it, then the Dark Apostle would have to fight against those scary Ascended Giants by himself, or perhaps only with the aid of Blinky. Granted, Blinky was a powerful enough companion spirit, but VS himself could bring a lot more to the table on account of being a mech designer. He had cooperated with mech pilots in combat situations in the past and had always proven extremely helpful. VS was sure that the Dark Apostle needed his expertise on technology to target the weak points of enemy gear. The two resumed their talks. After forming a reluctant consensus on the most important demands, the hostility between the two mellowed out as they began to hash out agreements on less important subjects. VS still hated the Dark Apostle and vice versa, but they had formed an implicit truce for the time being. There was no reason to direct their hostility at each other at this early junction. They had yet to conquer the Phase Lord department. They needed to prioritize their collective goal over their emotions towards each other. In the end, VS was glad that the Dark Apostle proved rational enough to set aside his irrational desires and focus on the bigger picture. Whether he would continue to behave in the future remained to be seen, but VS strangely felt optimistic about their cooperation. To be honest, VS still felt a little sour about losing 40 hours of the week, but he could live with the outcome so long as he gained the backing and the protection of the Ascended Giants. No matter the technicalities involved with who exactly was in charge, nobody would take VS lightly once they learned that he commanded the loyalty of so many human Phase Lords. VS would finally step up in high society and become qualified to participate in greater affairs. He could effectively take advantage of the direct military power at his disposal to sway the outcomes of entire campaigns. He could help his friends and allies win crucial battles, allowing them to survive and thrive in the dangerous years ahead. He could also turn his Ascended Giants into de facto mercenaries. He could send them to reinforce faltering states and groups while demanding heavy rewards in return. In short, VS could do much with so many Phase Lords at his disposal, but none of it would mean anything if he and the Dark Apostle failed to win the leadership challenge. Now that we have agreed to work together, let's talk about the combat gear that we will be using. Chapter 7147. Strategizing. After securing the Dark Apostle's cooperation, VS was eager to move to the next step of the preparations. As a sign of goodwill, the collies had unlocked the shackles and removed the chains. That did not mean that they had disappeared. A pair of mechs continued to carry them around as they shadowed the human Phase Lord. The message was clear. If the Dark Apostle acted out in any way, he would get locked up before he could escape. In any case, despite his awful attitude, the Dark Apostle was not stupid enough to test his limits. So far, he remained civilized and tolerant to the humans around him. The fact of the matter was that he needed to rely on their help if he wanted to have any chance of success in the leadership challenge. Their tech materials and other support could make a massive difference in the upcoming duels. VS still utilized Blinky's manifestation as a vehicle. It put a bit of a strain on him to maintain this particular form, but it was better than nothing. Department head Demetrius Solclavia bravely entered the ritual chamber in order to present the initial game plan. The two of you will be able to pass the leadership challenge so long as you win 3 out of 4 matches. This means that we only have to take 3 opponents into account at most. I do not think that any of you will mind if you concede the duel against the oscillating fist before it can begin. I object. The Dark Apostle immediately spoke up. The Ascended Giants want to take the measure of my strength. To evade a 4th duel when I am in a position to fight further is an act of cowardice. I want us to be ready to fight a 4th time if necessary. I do not have to win. I only need to last long enough while putting up a good enough performance to earn the respect of my men. Won't it be counterproductive if the current Polemarchos smacks you around on the dueling grounds? VS countered. It is true that I will not paint myself in a good light by losing against the oscillating fist, but at least I will have earned a decent measure of respect from him, as well as the other ascending giants for mustering up the courage to make the attempt. A contract between us may compel the oscillating fist to step down if all of the Strategoi have lost, but he will not be able to trust me completely if I have not yet exchanged blows with him. This is a necessity. As long as I have won him over, I will smoothly be able to take over the Ascended Giants. He raised a decent point. The Ascended Giants had become a lot more honor-bound. They cared about their pride and honor so much that even the Dark Apostle wanted to seek a confrontation that was not strictly necessary. Besides, the Dark Apostle grinned with V's giant face. If I ever lose 2 out of 3 matches, I need to win the final bout if I still want to remain eligible to take over the Ascended Giants. It is best if you take this matchup seriously. The Chief Enforcer nodded after hearing this. Very well. We shall do so, but the probability of victory is still low no matter how much preparations we make. We should still pin our hopes on winning the duels against the 3 Strategoi, of which 2 of them are more vulnerable than the remaining one. The department head waved his arm. Multiple projections came to life. They each depicted the last known images of the Phase Lords in full battle regalia. These images had been taken from the decrypted data stolen from the data cores at the headquarters on Jotunheim. Not all of these images are up to date, but they should give you a certain impression of what you can expect to encounter on the day of the leadership challenge. We know the least about the oscillating fist, but from the archival footage that we have retrieved, he is a close-ranged warrior that is fast, tough, and hard-hitting. Countering him is nearly impossible because his fundamentals are too strong. His boxing skills remain impeccable, and he possesses the best raiment built for the Phase Lord department. Both VS and the Dark Apostle felt intimidated by the depiction of the oscillating fist. This was truly a warrior beyond comparison. Perhaps the only way to defeat him was to rely on high mobility and ranged weapons to kite him around and whittle down his defenses over time, but the rules were not friendly towards the scumbag method. The Dark Apostle would never be able to win the respect of the oscillating fist and the Ascended Giants if he actively avoided close-quarters combat. If winning is out of the question, then it is better to emphasize defense over offense. VS analyzed. The goal is not to win the duel but to exchange fists long enough with the oscillating fist to look impressive and prove your courage. A defensive approach is not as effective against the oscillating fist. The Patient Builder warned. He is named this way because he has mastered a fighting method that enables him to generate destructive oscillating shockwaves that can penetrate past most physical defenses. The fact that he is able to produce this effect with a naked fist is already impressive enough. When he is equipped with gauntlets that contain special amplifying tech, he is theoretically able to defeat a greater Phase Lord that has lost his spatial barrier. Does that mean that the oscillating fist is not as good at tearing down energy defenses? Yes, but this is only relative. The oscillating fist will most definitely carry a space suppressor around that can weaken Azure energy shields and spatial barriers. His raiment may be equipped with other weapon systems that are designed to counter energy defenses. These are necessary measures when fighting against alien phase leaders. The oscillating fist possessed too many advantages at close range. It was ridiculous to even think about gaining the upper hand against this adversary in a direct collision. Blinky swished his tail. My original point still stands. Even if defenses are not as effective against the oscillating fist, they can still slow him down to an extent. We will lose in an instant if we neglect our defenses. That does not mean we can ignore our offense either. Given that his raiment is of such high quality, our weapons need to be absurdly powerful in order to have any chance of winning this match. Do you have any suggestions, counselor? I do, but let us consider the other matchups first. Demetrius Solclavia nodded. I understand. Since the rules state that we are allowed to choose the order of duels, it is necessary for us to settle this matter so that we can accurately formulate our plans. Of the 3 Strategoi, the Unshakable King is described as a stronger and more resilient Ascended Giant than the other Phalanx leaders. The real question is whether you first wish to challenge the Fiery Axe or the Divine Harpoon. Both of them are traitors, but the severity of their treachery is not as bad as it could have been. VS said. From what I have learned from the gathered intelligence, the Divine Harpoon is probably the only strong voice that still advocates for maintaining at least a loose relationship with Red humanity. The Fiery Axe is a staunch proponent of independence. She also plans to kill us if we do not put up a good enough fight, according to her judgment. That caused the Dark Apostle to scowl. I care little for the Divine Harpoon's weak sentiments, but the Fiery Axe cannot be allowed to survive. Anyone who seeks my head must be prepared to lose their own in return. Have you been listening to what I am saying? We do not necessarily have to kill her. As long as we gear up with short-lasting but powerful combat gear, you can overwhelm her so much in the first minutes that she will never think of you as weak and unworthy. It is best if you can force her to admit defeat at that point, because once your weapons and gear have reached the limits of their tolerance, they will fall off hard. Then I should make the best use of this time to cut off the Fiery Axe's head. The Dark Apostle was way too quick to resort to killing as a solution. VS hoped that he would mellow out or change his mind when the duel had begun. He was not hoping to spare the Fiery Axe. He simply believed that it was a waste to kill a precious human phase lord when she would no longer pose a threat once her future leader impressed her on the dueling ground. Besides, warriors tended to be at their most desperate when they were pushed to the brink of death. Who knew what kind of nasty surprises the Fiery Axe had in store when the Dark Apostle went all out in trying to kill the leader of the Flesh Chopper Phalanx? Borrowing the Plasma Axe was probably just one of several solutions. Demetrius Solclavia voiced his own opinion. The Phase Lord department needs a culling in order to set it straight again. Removing an unreliable phalanx leader, such as the Fiery Axe, will give you the opportunity to appoint a more loyal and reliable Ascended Giant in her place. My suggestion is to be opportunistic. Make sure to arm yourself with a suitably lethal weapon and be ready to launch the killing blow if you see an opening. They discussed a bit more on what kind of weapons, raiment, and strategy they should choose against this axe-wielding giant. Once they agreed on a specific configuration, they analyzed the other opponent. The Divine Harpoon is rumored to be stronger than the Fiery Axe. The Chief Enforcer said. There is no proof that this is the case, but it is best not to underestimate him. He is almost a century-and-a-half years old and possesses a wealth of experience. As his new name suggests, he is a master at throwing harpoons but can fight well enough when wielding them as spears. How to fight against such an opponent? If honor is not a priority, then it is best to adopt a fast loadout and maintain as much distance as possible. VS suggested. It becomes exponentially more difficult to land any hits against an increasingly distant opponent. A fairly accurate but fast-firing rifle should be able to whittle down the Divine Harpoon's defenses while limiting our exposure to risk. Unacceptable. I will not adopt the strategy of a coward. This is not cowardice. This is winning. Everything can be excused so long as you win. Mortal, give me an alternative suggestion that satisfies my honor. Aside from wielding a spear yourself, I believe that the combination of a sword and a physical shield fares quite well in this matchup if everything else is equal. Acceptable. VS did not quite agree, but it appeared that he had no choice but to accept this direction. Hopefully the Divine Harpoon will be the least threatening opponent we face in the leadership challenge. The intelligence paints him as sympathetic towards the RC and Red humanity. This may give him a reason to not put his best into the fight, though he has to be careful not to be obvious about it. The Ascended Giants will not let him give up so easily. I suggest we fight against him first so that we can build up enough momentum and preemptively prove to the Fiery Axe that she does not need to kill us out of a misguided sense of pride. Demetrius Solclavia shook his head. I do not agree with that, counselor. If the assumption that the Divine Harpoon is sympathetic towards us is correct, then we should not face him in the first duel but rather the second or third one. No matter the score up, until then you can fight against the leader of the Faceless Giants at a lower intensity and earn your victory with less effort than before. This should give you another 3-hour window of valuable rest time to prepare for the next duel. That was a clever approach. VS and the Dark Apostle both saw the necessity of making sure that they could maintain their condition as much as possible as they concluded one fight after another. A leadership challenge was never supposed to be easy or fair. The demand to fight once every 3 hours was meant to portray the strength and the perseverance of a potential leader. This was also why it was not strictly necessary for the Dark Apostle to win all 4 duels in order to take over as leader. Being able to topple the 3 Strategoi without enjoying adequate rest in between already served as an adequate show of force. After fighting so much, there was no way that the Dark Apostle could fight the 4th and final duel in their peak condition. Losing became the expected outcome, which meant that they would not bear much shame if they got beat up by the Oscillating Fist. That was fine with VS. Chapter 7148. Shared Goals. There was not enough time for VS to dedicate his time towards designing and fabricating 4 sets of equipment. As much as he wanted to do everything in person, it was unrealistic to do so when the leadership challenge was scheduled to take place in a matter of days. VS therefore talked it over with the Dark Apostle and the Patient Builder. The latter agreed to mobilize the RC's vast resources and manpower to develop and construct 4 sets of raiments that complied with the rules set by both sides. Demetrius Solclavia felt honored by the trust he received. We shall endeavor to fulfill your expectations. Winning the leadership challenge is paramount to stabilizing this source of uncertainty and converting the human phase lords into a helpful addition to our armed forces. As we speak, the defenses of dozens of star systems in the Rebarthan Pact have succumbed against the Vorabug onslaught. We urgently need you to encourage the Phase Lord Department to mobilize against one of the war fronts so that we can free up more forces to slow down the new threat. The mention of the mutated Vorabug elicited a disgusted reaction from the Dark Apostle. These space insects are foul and unnatural. V's alter ego snarled. They are a plague upon the dwarf galaxy. They have no redeeming quality that can convince ascended giants that they have a place among the stars. They worship no god aside from their mysterious queen, who prefers to lead her battles from behind rather than the front. Honor is completely alien to this menace. That reason alone is enough to condemn this detestable race to extinction. If that was how all phase leaders thought about the mutated Vorabug threat, then that would hopefully lead to the native aliens redirecting more forces to the new warfront. Who was he kidding? VS did not think that the Red Cabal could let go of their hatred against Red humanity long enough to tackle the greater threat first. While many people got distracted by the Vorabugs assailing the Rebarthan flank, the native aliens had quietly increased their troop buildup and tempo at the Terran front. With all of the changes that took place inside human space, the native aliens correctly recognized that the entire Terran alliance was only protected by a single god pilot. As fast as the light of Sol may be, even he could not cover all of the border systems by himself. Amidst all of the crises assailing Red humanity, it became utterly ridiculous that the most powerful troops of the Red Collective had been sitting on their thumbs for so many months. Other than an early showing the oscillating fist, had commanded many of his underlings to spread out and hide in all kinds of hidey holes. This showed that the ascended giants already started to treat Red humanity as an enemy rather than their brothers and sisters. The lack of action from the Phase Lord Department had caused incalculable damage to the Red Collective. Their other cultivator troops were quite special and interesting in their own way, but they were sorely lacking in hard power. In contrast, the 361 human lesser phase lords represented a significant force, especially if they were deployed in larger groups. The RC invested so much phase water and other resources in them that could have been spent on building up lots of other forces. If VS and the Dark Apostle were able to gain control over the ascended giants, then neither of them intended to keep them idle. VS was motivated by the need to save Red humanity. There were too many disasters unfolding at the same time. If he could help his civilization deal with one of them, then that would go a long way into turning everyone's fortunes around. The Dark Apostle wanted to earn glory and turn his ascended giants into a force to be feared and respected across the Red Ocean. While his attachment to Red humanity was not as strong, he had no interest in letting the mutated Vorabugs devour every planet of life, thereby ultimately turning the dwarf galaxy completely barren. Everything hinges on this upcoming leadership challenge. VS spoke while continuing to possess Blinky. To that end, I will personally design and fabricate 4 sets of melee weapons. I may not be as good as Keddy's, but I have my own tricks. Just give me access to your workshops and strategic materials reserve. The department head of the enforcement department paused for a few seconds. I shall make sure you will get most of what you want. Unfortunately, our strategic materials reserve is strictly guarded. Not only that, but many of the resources stored inside are already claimed or reserved by other members of the Red Collective. Furthermore, there are several classes of special exotics and hypers that are so rare and exceptional that even I am not authorized to withdraw them. Our reserve is a collective pool that many different parties have contributed to, that also grants them all a measure of control over it. The rules are especially formulated to deny any single individual or party sole access. That was unfortunately right. VS once again got screwed by his own layout. The Red Collective was too fractured and divided. Even if Demetrius Solclavia was one of the most powerful executives of the Red Collective, he had to rely on his relations with other department heads to drum up so much support for the current initiative. Perhaps it was for the best. The same rules that prevented the chief enforcer from mobilizing all of the resources of the RC also hindered him from abusing his authority. It was impossible for a figure like the Polymath to take over the Red Collective in a single sweep. In any case, VS could not ask the RC for more, considering that it was shouldering so many different responsibilities. He felt grateful enough that the department head of the enforcement department suspended his busy schedule in order to address this issue in person. I need to get to work, he said through Blinky. While I appreciate that I have been able to talk to you, Dark Apostle, I need to regain control over my body in order to design the new weapons that will hopefully deliver enough victories in a few days. The human phase lord clearly felt reluctant to give up control over their shared true body, but he understood that this was the mech designer's time to shine. Fine. I shall relinquish control over this divine body for now. Do not forget our agreement and do not attempt to challenge the ascended giants by yourself. From today onwards, there is no need for you to fumble around during combat. I am the superior warrior. I shall fight your enemies on your behalf because I do not trust you to keep this shared body safe against the foes that you always seem to provoke. Gee, thanks. You are welcome, weakling. The human phase lord did what he said and voluntarily withdrew by shrinking his true body. VS soon felt his consciousness getting drawn back to his human-scaled body where it belonged. His nanosuit automatically adjusted and returned to a thick but comfortable form. Please mobilize the tech and resources as soon as possible. VS reminded the chief enforcer. I won't be able to work with all tech and materials, but I am sure I can make selective use out of a handful of good stuff. After discussing the details with Demetrius Solclavia for a moment, VS finally exited the ritual chamber before teleporting back to the Tarask. Just before VS was about to head into his design lab in order to design the new set of armaments for his Phase Lord personality, he made sure to drop by his wife and children and briefly inform them of what he planned. The children looked confused and worried. Are you sure that your other personality is trustworthy, Papa? Aurelia asked with concern. Your deal with him mainly worked because he was surrounded by unfriendly mechs and other forces. Once we have left Yernstall, he can surround himself with dozens of ascended giants and forcibly break through any potential blockage. What stops him from getting away? We are still working on it, to be honest. I like to think that for all that he comes across as different, he still shares a few traits in common with me. One of them is my hatred of traitors and insistence on adhering to contracts. My other self must know that if he breaks his word once, I will never trust him again. My future dealings with him will be a lot more coercive. Neither of us wants our relationship to devolve to such a deplorable situation. You are gambling on whether this dark apostle is rational enough to recognize that it is in his best interest to abide by the current agreement. His daughter noted. From what I have heard from you, none of the ascended giants are entirely rational. Their norms and values have changed to the point where some of them see little problem with defecting to the Red Cabal. That doesn't necessarily mean they are irrational, honey. Their logic may be twisted, but it is still logic. The biggest reason why they think so weird is because of the central assumption that they are no longer human anymore. They call themselves ascended giants as if they are convinced they have become a new and arguably superior race. It is like the difference between regular whale-like species that have evolved from planets such as Old Earth or other places and the phase whale race. The latter is so much more superior than anything similar that they deserve to exist in their own category. Oh. Aurelia looked intrigued as she thought of all of the implications. Meanwhile, Gloriana still looked extremely concerned about letting her husband fight 4 elite warriors. Since it has come to this, I will not question your motivations or cast doubt on your chances. She slowly said, I do not even care whether you can win. I just want you to prioritize your survival above all else. It is not shameful for a mech designer to admit defeat in a duel against a champion. It is outrageous that these so-called giants wish to test you on your martial prowess as opposed to your actual strengths. In my opinion, you only need to show up and display just enough courage to avoid being seen as a coward. Everything else is unnecessary and life-threatening. VS responded with a wry smile. It is not that simple, dear. The ascended giants are sharp enough to recognize if I am fighting half-heartedly. Besides, I am not the one doing the fighting. It will be the Dark Apostle, as he calls himself for weird reasons. He is much closer in nature to the ascended giants, so you can be assured that he is bound by honor and pride to make an earnest attempt in every duel. Do you need my assistance to develop the weapons? Or would you like me to assist with the development of the raiments? I can help turn them into masterworks. VS shook his head. Don't bother. They won't make use of Architect, and there is too little time to refine their designs to the point where they turn into masterworks, especially at their projected scale and level of complexity. The RC and I can take care of ourselves. This is an internal matter as far as we are concerned. You should continue to spend your time on finalizing the Riot Mark III project. What is the point of trying to finish it within a week when you will just end up injured and crippled to the point where you cannot take part in the fabrication run? She questioned. Do not forget that your participation is vital if you want the Riot Mark III to turn into the chaotic mech of your dreams. I have little interest and knowledge in the special techniques that you have recently acquired. Then we will just ask Venerable Rosa Orphan to wait a few more weeks. VS dismissively waved his hand. Besides, I am not too sure whether I will end up in that state. Hopefully I will be better off when I have completed the leadership challenge. Chapter 7149. Lethal Plans. When VS entered his design lab in order to draft out and design the melee weapons that he intended to wield in the upcoming leadership challenge, he was joined by an unexpected guest. You are not supposed to be here, young lady. Don't kick me out, Papa. I can help. I know lots about fighting. I can give you advice and stuff. VS directed a dubious glance at his middle child. Andraste looked way too excited to drop this matter. Although a part of VS wanted to punish his girl for sneaking away from her mother, another part of him felt it wouldn't be bad if he had a father-daughter bonding session. Fine. If you want to help, then come over here and sit. I will only let you watch me at work when I draft the different armaments. As soon as I transition to the more technical aspects of my work, it is off to bed with you, young lady. This is the boring part of my work, so it is not as if you are missing anything." His daughter was fine with that. She ran up and seated herself on a floating chair that automatically adjusted in height. "So who are you fighting and what weapons are you thinking about making?" she eagerly asked. VS briefed her on the 4 ascended giants as well as the rudimentary strategies that he and the others had devised. The red-headed girl quickly furrowed her brows. She recognized that none of the duels were easy matchups. "How strong is your dark self?" she asked. "No, wait, the better question is how skilled he is at wielding weapons." "He is not a dark reflection of myself," VS objected. "He merely calls himself this way for reasons. Anyway, from what I have been able to gather, he is actually pretty good, but only with the weapons that I am familiar with, which is polearms. He doesn't have any notable proficiency with swords, axes, and other weapons. That said, nothing is absolute. There are unconventional solutions that can quickly remedy this problem, though only after paying a hefty price." His daughter understood the difficulties that her father had to overcome. "Chem, that sounds bad. Unless you have mastered the spear, you will be at a disadvantage when you try to fight against brawlers like the oscillating fist. He can outmaneuver your attacks and get inside your reach with ease. Let's not get ahead of ourselves," VS said. "According to the plan that we have formed, my first duel will be against the Unshakable King. Isn't he the second strongest phase lord?" "Yes, which is why it is important to fight him when my alter ego is in the best condition. The most ideal outcome is to win 3 out of 4 matches. Don't worry too much. One of the reasons why we have decided it is best to start with the Unshakable King first is because he excels at defense. That does not mean his offensive power is weak, but I am confident that the Dark Apostle will be able to withdraw and admit defeat before he suffers a crippling injury. Winning a match against this opponent is nice but not strictly necessary." Andraste analyzed the images and archival footage of past versions of the leader of the UR Titan phalanx. His raiment was thick and impressive, so much so that if he wanted to abide by the limitations of the duel, he could not bring his usual arsenal of weapons into the fight. "What weapons will he use?" the young girl asked. "That is a bit of a mystery," VS responded. "His normal set of armaments consist of a pair of impact hammers, a kinetic cannon, and amplifiers for his spatial abilities. I am pretty sure he will change to a lighter set of weapons in order to comply with the rules, but I do not have any clue what they may be. When it comes to his phase water organs, we know that he excels at solidifying the surrounding space and increasing the strength and mass of his true body. He turns into a rock that slows enemies down and mitigates every incoming blow." Andraste frowned and scratched her head in a cute manner. "Can you bring a big cannon and bombard the Unshakable King from a distance?" VS became happy when she made this suggestion. This showed that she had not become as irrational as the sword maidens who believed that their blades could solve every problem. Instructing the Saint Commander to tutor Andraste in ranged combat paid off big time. "I can do so, but not only will I look like a coward in front of the Ascended Giants, but I don't think the weapons that I can carry into the duel have the firepower to penetrate through the Unshakable King's defenses within an hour. This guy is highly experienced in taking hits and has many different solutions to spread out all of the incoming damage. I need to rely on a solution that works up close. What about a plasma weapon or a destroyer weapon?" "A destroyer weapon is out of the question," VS immediately replied. "The low-tier stuff isn't strong enough to make a difference, and the high-tier stuff is very rare and difficult to acquire. Besides, most of them are made for mechs, which makes them too small when wielded by phase lords at this scale. A plasma weapon is a decent suggestion, though. They can potentially burn through the Unspeakable King's defenses, but their power consumption is so high that any power solution that I can integrate into my raiment will be hard-pressed to last that long given the obvious size limitations. I will have to carry a big and volatile backpack module on my raiment." Andraste did not see much of a problem with that. A power reactor mounted on your back does not sound like a bad idea. If he is as slow as you say, he won't be able to maneuver behind your back unless he can teleport or something. She raised a good point. If VS was able to mount a bigger but more vulnerable reactor on his back and keep it safe, he could wield a weapon that could inflict a lot of damage to the Unshakable King's defenses. While VS doubted whether this was enough to whittle down this opponent fast enough, it was better than most other options. He quietly transmitted his ideas about this raiment to his chief of staff. She would make sure to pass it on to the teams responsible for developing his dueling raiments. "Plasma swords are the simplest and generally the most effective variety of plasma-based melee weapons," he said. "Unfortunately, I am not skilled with the art of the blade. You do not strictly need to be good at wielding swords if you rely on plasma to do all of the damage," his daughter pointed out. "It certainly helps if you can wield it with skill, though. It may be better for you to wield a plasma spear and preferably a lengthier one. That will make it harder for the Unshakable King to get close enough to land his blows on you. If you have an advantage in mobility, then you can keep poking at him whenever you have the chance while darting back if he tries to launch a counterattack." That sounded like a viable game plan. VS began to draft the suggestions in the design suite. He performed a few fast calculations and made a lot of guesses. It would be rather awkward to fight with a big reactor mounted on his back. A long spear was also clumsy to wield. There was a chance the unshakable king could still bypass it despite his disadvantage in mobility. There should be just enough mass allowance left to add in a backup weapon, he said. I am tempted to throw in a cold steel knife, but it may be better to turn it into a plasma knife instead. If my reactor breaks or malfunctions, I do not think I have any hope of penetrating this guy's defenses. His daughter did not quite agree. What if the unshakable king's defenses are especially chosen to resist plasma and other thermal weapons? You should make a small cold steel knife that is able to penetrate through defenses with the help of special tech or materials. Hasn't the Red Collective promised to give you access to their internal stuff? There has to be something exotic that can help you finish him off. You told me that he is one of the biggest traitors among the Ascended Giants and that he wants to claim the bounty on your head. You need to be ready for anything. You're right. I will look into building something special with the help of the RC. VS said. Let's consider my next opponent. In the second duel, my Phase Lord self will fight against the Fiery Axe. This is a woman who has threatened to kill me if I don't put up a good fight. Hopefully the Dark Apostle's performance against the Unshakable King will be convincing enough, but in case that is not so, I need to be able to perform well right from the start. Given her hostility, I have tentatively decided to wield a spear with high penetration properties in order to help me land a fatal blow if possible. He drafted the solution in the design suite. The spear would be paired with a raiment that was lighter and more maneuverable than the one he intended to use in the previous duel. Andraste quickly figured out his overall strategy. From what I can see, the Fiery Axe is fast and strong in offense. She is just like the mech pilots of the Red Axes or Venerable Kolak Glendale who pilots the Green Axe. It is a pain to defend with their axes, so they try to go on the offensive as much as possible so that the fight will happen on their terms. If you want to counter this style, you either need to outfight them by relying on superior skill or move faster, so that they cannot maneuver around you as easily. VS drafted a larger and more powerful flight system on the back of the light raiment. I agree with your analysis. I don't have confidence in my weapon skills, so I think it is better to sacrifice hard defenses for superior mobility. This will be a highly dynamic duel. The winner will likely be the Phase Lord that is able to maneuver better than the opponent. I will tell the RC to develop a light raiment that is mounted with a disproportionately strong flight system. He would have preferred to design this raiment himself alongside collaborators that he trusted, such as the recently returned Juliet Stamaros. Unfortunately, there was not enough time, so all he could do was to transmit his specifications to the RC and wait for it to deliver the end products. He disliked the lack of control over equipment that he and his alter ego would rely upon to survive and win, but he had no other choice. VS added a few backup knives to his configuration for the second duel, but they shouldn't be needed. He placed a lot of hope into the shorter but hopefully more lethal spear. This will be his main weapon, and maybe the weapon to end a woman who had no qualms about killing her progenitor due to her distorted pride. At least the Unshakable King had a more pragmatic and rational motivation behind his desire to claim his head. It will be difficult to predict who will gain the upper hand in this duel. VS commented. Neither the Dark Apostle nor the Fiery Axe will have much in the way of defenses this time. A single good hit can easily turn into a heavy or crippling injury. All of the maneuvering around will further mess up any predictions. Andraste looked critically at the projected footage of the Fiery Axe. You could try outlasting her. She clearly fights like a hothead. Warriors like this have a habit of going all out right from the beginning and don't pay much attention to endurance. If you can withstand her offensive while holding back as much as possible, you can launch a furious offensive in the last 5 minutes against a tired opponent. VS thought about it for a moment. That definitely sounds like a viable strategy, but I am not too sure the Ascended Giants will be impressed with the Dark Apostle after dragging out a match for so long. If I had a choice, I would definitely follow your proposal. Chapter 7150. Respect the Sword. When it came to the third and fourth duels, VS did not take them as seriously. While it was still important to prepare as best as possible to fight against the other two leaders of the Ascended Giants, they shouldn't be as readily willing to kill him as the Unshakable King and the Fiery Axe. He quite enjoyed the process of sharing his thoughts with his daughter. While he had to be careful not to mention anything too sensitive, he believed that the RC did not mind if he told her less incriminating information about the current situation. As an avid sword initiate, as well as a capable marksman, Andraste was already 10 times the warrior. The third duel will be between the Dark Apostle and the Divine Harpoon. VS told his daughter. As you can imagine, the Divine Harpoon carries multiple harpoons on his person, each of which is connected to chains that he can use to pull anything he has caught. One of the special features is that they possess very high penetration characteristics, though it doesn't mean he can instantly punch through every energy shield or spatial barrier. Just like us, he is not allowed to employ any superdimensional technology. That does not mean he can rely on other stuff to improve the penetration power of his harpoons. His daughter responded. I bet his phasewater organs and raiment are all chosen to improve the strength of his throw, and to make his harpoon penetrate better. You shouldn't underestimate what he is good at. He's the leader of the biggest troop, right? I think he has chosen to specialize in harpooning enemy phase lords and phase whales. As long as he can land a good throw, he can catch a big prey and slow it down long enough for the rest of his troops to descend and finish it off. If he wants to make this happen, then his harpoons have to be able to punch through the spatial barrier of at least a lesser phase lord. Your words make sense. VS hadn't thought about it from that angle. He watched the stolen footage of the divine harpoon carefully. Unfortunately, he was one of those human phase lords who typically did not show off his full might during his training sessions. He especially did not display his full harpooning prowess, likely to prevent his subordinates from collecting accurate data in preparation to mount their own leadership challenge. All of this placed the true strength of the divine harpoon underneath a cloud of uncertainty. Nobody knew how much power he had been hiding over the past few months or what aspects he focused on improving. Even if he is absurdly good at punching his harpoons through the defenses of phase lords, I do not think I have to worry about it as much as I should. VS tentatively said. We align with each other on a political level. The intelligence gathered from the headquarters indicate that he is pro-human. If this is true, then he should have a compelling interest in letting me win. This is why the Dark Apostle will meet him in the third duel. We are expecting him to make it a little easier for us to win. He can't be too blatant about it, but it is undeniable that it is in his best interest that we take over the Phase Lord department. His daughter looked thoughtful after hearing that. I have watched fighting tournaments where strategic losing is a thing. There are competitors that want to avoid a strong enemy or someone who can counter them pretty well in the next bracket if they win. There are also those who want to push one of their teammates ahead, and they can do that better by losing the right matches. There are rules that go against this, so it is not that easy to lose if you are known as a strong contender. How do these fighters cope with the restrictions? VS asked. Their favorite game plan is to take greater risks than usual. Her daughter responded. They choose to fight more recklessly. It will look impressive, and it may allow them to win a match if they are able to maintain their tempo, but they will also expose greater openings. It is relatively easier to punish them for their aggression. If the Divine Harpoon is thinking about doing the same, then you should adopt a counterattack strategy. Avoid his harpoon throws as best as possible and try to attack him in between. That sounded like a viable approach. It might not be the only way to cope with the Divine Harpoon, but it was a good starting point. VS smiled and rubbed his daughter's adorable head. Since the Divine Harpoon is a probable ally of ours, it is not a big priority for the Dark Apostle to possess a lot of lethality. This is why I am thinking about equipping my human Phase Lord self with a sword and shield combination. Why not a spear and shield combo? Your skill with a sword is worse than with a spear. That may be the case if I only wield a single weapon, but if I have to carry a shield, I can't wield a spear in the same way. It may be handier for me to wield a sword instead, he said. I have a way to make up for the gap in skill if it is necessary. His daughter frowned. You are disrespecting the sword. Keddies and the sword maidens would be angry if they heard you take swordsmanship so lightly. They will not be happy if they see you fumble around with a sword in your duel. I think it is better to stick with a short spear that you can comfortably wield with a single hand. As a budding sword initiate that Keddies trained in person, Andraste understood the perspective of sword practitioners very well. They took swordsmanship very seriously. To see their former patriarch wield a sword without putting in any art of passion into his fighting style was blasphemy. This was a surefire way to alienate himself from this key group of Larkin sons. VS eventually nodded. I didn't think about this angle. You are right to warn me about the potential repercussions. I cannot afford to sour my relationship with the sword maidens and the other sword practitioners of our clan. I will stick with what I am more comfortable with and wield a spear alongside a shield in the third duel. Given the Divine Harpoon's offensive focus, I think it is better if I emphasize defense this time. This guy is probably not as threatening once you neutralize the threat of his iconic harpoons. He started to draft a set of equipment that looked heavier and more robust. The raiment was notably thicker and better armored at the front. He also added in a physical shield that was sized large enough to provide strong protection to his torso and head. While he preferred to make the shield bigger, the mass allowance limited the extent to which he could do this. Making a longer and larger shield ate up his mass budget pretty quickly. He did not deem it worthwhile to overinvest in this regard. VS fully expected the physical shield to endure the brunt of the offensive. He already planned to look for any interesting tech or materials that could at least temporarily boost its toughness and enable it to better withstand strong piercing attacks. Given how much mass he allocated to the raiment and physical shield, he did not have much left over for the weapon. The spear had to be shorter than he would like. The lack of reach concerned him a bit, but he believed he could find other ways to compensate for this shortcoming. You do not need to chase after him. Andraste told her father. He needs to chase after you. That is the standard when it comes to mech duels. I think the same applies here. Even if both of you are equally as heavy as you enter the dueling ground, your defenses are thicker and heavier. From these images, there is no way the harpoons used by this phase lord are light. They are so big that he can't carry too much armor into the fight. That forces him to come to you as he possesses the advantage in mobility. You can legitimately stay in the same place and do nothing for an hour and still win the match by default if he refuses to come close. VS frowned. That sounds nice, but I doubt the divine harpoon will continue to maintain his distance. He is an ascended giant after all. Even if he is one of the saner ones, he still has to embody the honor and ideals of his troop. He will be branded a coward if he doesn't even dare to come close. At the same time, my victory will ring hollow if I have won this match in such a lame manner. The divine harpoon was bound to get close when his initial harpoon throws failed to produce the desired results. VS had to be ready to fight against an old and experienced soldier. However, there was also a lot more space for the divine harpoon to expose deliberate weaknesses. He could overcommit on his attacks or maneuver in directions that were not as optimal. The outcome of this duel heavily hinged on whether the divine harpoon was willing to play ball and concede victory to VS. The problem was that he could not be certain whether the strategos of the faceless giants was willing to compromise his integrity to this extent. If his transformation into a phase lord had messed him up to the point where he prioritized his pride and honor above his goals. That was why VS needed to take this possibility into account and make sure he could still stand a chance if the fight had progressed to this point. We may end up punching each other with our fists. VS muttered. This may be a problem because I don't have many phase water organs that can help me resist more blows or punch harder. Perhaps my only advantage is that my true body is larger and denser than most of the ascended giants. The limitations on scale might not make this prominent, but the extra mass and flesh definitely makes a certain difference in fights between different phase lords. Maybe that is enough for you to win the fight. Weight classes are very important in fighting tournaments. Those who are twice as heavy as their opponents don't need to work as hard to win their matches. Andraste mentioned. It would definitely be a nice advantage to have. It might also help him out in his matches against the other phase lords. VS knew that he possessed a powerful advantage over the ascended giants. He received special treatment from the heavenly authority of the Red Ocean. He knew that if he integrated more phase water organs into his true body, his phase water concentration magically increased at a rate far exceeding any normal level. Perhaps VS could take advantage of this by implanting a few helpful phase water organs with the help of the Red Collective. However, VS worried about whether integrating additional phase water organs so quickly would strengthen the Dark Apostles' control over their shared true body. VS had already learned his lesson about rashly progressing his phase lord cultivation without fully understanding what he was doing. Was it truly worthwhile to risk unanticipated consequences just to give himself a last-minute boost? Perhaps he needed to discuss this matter further with the collies. They might know a lot more about this subject. He seriously suspected that he would need the boost provided by more martial-oriented phase water organs in order to win enough duels. Chapter 7151. Large Uplift Project. While VS appreciated Andraste's input, she needed to go to bed. He called over Lucky and instructed his cat to make sure that her daughter returned to their stateroom. Don't let her wander off in random directions. Meow. Once the red-headed girl left the design studio, VS could finally tackle his work without too many interruptions and disturbances. He refined his drafts and added a few features that he had previously overlooked. There was still a lot of room for expansion and upgrades as he had yet to investigate what the RC could offer. He followed up on that by contacting his chief of staff and telling her to call for an update from the enforcement department. The department head had personally promised that VS would gain expanded access to the internal stores and tech database. It was not wise to finalize his designs before he understood what was possible. Aside from that, VS also intended to consult another source for assistance. He transmitted a few innocent messages to Gloriana and Kedis. On the surface, he merely relayed a summary of his weapon design ideas and asked them to provide their input whenever convenient. In reality, he embedded very subtle coded messages into the sentencing and formatting that relayed his request to meet each other in the system space at a very specific date and time. An hour went by as VS continued to work, though he was not able to make too much substantive progress due to keeping a lot of design choices open. Since that was the case, he decided to enter into various tech libraries and databases in order to study the latest advancements on hypertechnology and nanotechnology, particularly in relation to a handful of familiar E-energy attributes. When the time had almost come, VS began to space out while watching the clock very carefully. On the instant the right time had come, he instantly conveyed his intention to enter the system space. Just as expected, VS along with Kedis and Gloriana appeared at the base of the meandering trail that led to the top of the mountain. The transition from an indoor naval environment to a natural outdoor environment was jarring, but VS had entered the system space enough time to get used to the abrupt shift. The same went for Kedis, while Gloriana needed a moment to balance herself. Hello again, Kedis. VS first greeted the swordmaster, who he hadn't spoken to in person for a while. How is the expeditionary fleet doing these days? Fine. she said. I am actually looking to upgrade it into a first-class fleet, but this is such a gigantic and expensive endeavor that progress is slow. VS raised his eyebrows. I thought that you are resistant to letting the expeditionary fleet turn into a force that is out of reach to second-class mech pilots. My opinions haven't changed, but it is frustrating to see a highly experienced and highly successful second-class fleet like ours do so well, only for the results to mean little in the greater scheme of things. I hate to admit it, but only victories against stronger forces can drive back the native aliens from a territory and keep it safe over a longer period of time. Other second-class forces can handle the weaker alien fleets more or less. They will suffer greater losses than us, but they do not have to enter into battle as often if we are able to relieve the entire war theater by using our improved first-class mechs to slaughter their crack troops, destroy their staging points, and kill their phase lords. VS exchanged glances with his wife. Both of them understood that this was not going to be a quick and easy job. You need to complete a lot of steps in order to get this done, he told her. First, you need to acquire tens of thousands of first-class mechs, of which the cheapest are already many times more expensive than the quasi first-class mechs that we currently field. Then you need to retrain all of those mech pilots on how to fight at this elevated level. The mostly old, fragile, and outdated starships of our first fleet also need to be upgraded wholesale, which not only eats up an astronomical amount of funding and first-class bulk resources but also requires you to book the orbital dry docks necessary to perform the mass refits. Then you have to convince the partners of the Golden Skull Alliance to play along with this expensive endeavor. This was such a huge project that VS could not imagine getting it done within 5 years, let alone 10. Just the difficulty of trying to find enough shipyards to convert so many second-class starships into first-class ones was unimaginable. In fact, it may be faster and less troublesome to just construct completely new first-class starships straight away. The Larkin Sons could pass on their second-class vessels to other forces or sell them off to other groups. Surprisingly, Kedis did not appear daunted at all. She smirked. This is not an impulse decision, VS. I have already discussed bits and pieces of this plan with the rest of the Golden Skull Alliance for numerous months. Do you truly think they are content to fight with second-class or quasi-first-class hardware for the remainder of the Red War? They have been saving up the rich amount of spoils they have accumulated with every victory to fund and supply the materials for the massive upgrade effort for years now. We have destroyed enough alien phase fighters and alien warships to upgrade the exterior and much of the internal structural components of pretty much every mech and warship in our combined fleet. We are currently spending time on designing the right first-class hardware that can easily adapt the salvaged materials that we have stockpiled. VS had to admit that reusing plundered materials could make this immense effort a lot more affordable. Besides, it was not as if the Larkin Sun clan was poor to begin with. Even with the rising inflation and the increasing difficulty of doing business in a more complicated new frontier, the clan still sold a lot of mechs, received a lot of rewards from the Red 3, and salvaged a lot of valuables from the battlefields. The same applied to the alliance partners such as the Glory Seekers, the Cross Clan, the Adelaide 3rd Fleet, and the Bujay Clan. However, just having a lot of money and resources was not enough. The clan was notoriously lacking in infrastructure. What about the shipyards required to do all of the naval refits? Kedis remained optimistic. That is admittedly a bigger challenge. This requires a lot of diplomacy and horse trading, which I am not necessarily good at. I passed my request onto the Saint Commander and let her do the work of approaching the relevant parties. She told me that it may be possible to make arrangements with the Terran Alliance and more recently the Red Fleet, since our relations have improved so much with them. Their own needs are great, but as long as we are willing to give them superdimensional matter and other goods, they may just accept our orders at the required scale. Our alliance partners aren't as wealthy, VS pointed out. I am not sure whether we are giving them any superdimensional matter out of pity or friendship, but even if we do, it shouldn't be enough to make them available for trade. Kedis shrugged. They will have to make their own arrangements. We have been propping them up and offering a lot of direct and indirect aid to them since they have been such reliable partners for so many years, but at a certain point they need to earn their way to becoming a legitimate first-class power by relying on their own strengths. You should know that groups like the Bujay Fleet have been trying to get this done for multiple generations. They talked a bit more about the difficulties and complications of trying to promote into a proper first-class power. While it was not completely necessary to pair first-class mechs with first-class starships, a disparity between the two could really screw over the former one day. Second-class carriers and support vessels were slower, more fragile, and most importantly a lot less resistant towards warp interdiction. The more superior versions of alien phase fighters and alien warships could catch up to them with greater ease and block their attempts to engage in warp travel and flee the battlefield. Once the aliens demolished all of those vulnerable starships, the first-class mechs would run out of energy and other resources sooner or later. That would turn them into sitting ducks. The only way to salvage anything valuable out of this mess was to eject the cockpits of the first-class mechs in advance and have all of the surviving mech pilots board the fastest starships before getting away. That would still cost the Larkin Sun clan a lot of hardware. Of course, it was not strictly necessary for the Larkin Sons or the other alliance partners to arrange their own transportation for their own first-class mechs. They could try and partner up with an organization state or star empire that possessed plenty of spare carriers or cargo vessels. They could ferry the expensive mechs to where they were needed. In fact, they did not even have to stick around. No matter whether a mech force made use of first-class, second-class, or even third-class starships, they could all be used to transport mechs to a fortified planet before leaving to undertake other transportation assignments. The mechs would have no effective way to retreat even if the planet fell, but they could still fight like hell and contribute a lot to the local defense effort. At worst, the mech pilots could abandon their machines and pile up on evacuation vessels that left just before the planet succumbed to the invaders. In short, it was not the end of the universe if the remaining alliance partners failed to make any progress in forming a first-class fleet. How long do you think this uplift effort will take for the Larkinson clan only? VS seriously asked. If we leave our alliance partners out of the picture, then around 4 years. The Swordmaster replied. This is just a loose effort. If we make more progress on some fronts, we can shorten that to 3 years. We could also get delayed to the point where we won't be ready until 6 years have passed. That's okay. I understand the complexities involved. In order to get this done, you need us to design a whole range of first-class living mechs, right? Kedis nodded. Yes. Retraining mech pilots is a serious pain, especially without using any EdNet quotas. We can still do it much easier these days than in the past. The auxiliary chi cultivation methods have done wonders in improving a mech pilot's capacity to learn complicated science and theory that were previously beyond their level. They do not even have to install high-quality implants in order to keep up with their theoretical studies, although it can still provide a lot of help. In any case, much of the reason why we need to wait at least 3 years is because it takes at least that much time for most second-class mech pilots to reach the absolute minimum standard of a first-class mech pilot. That sounded plausible. I see. So there is no immediate hurry in designing the first-class living mechs, correct? Yes, but I would still like you to work on them sooner rather than later. We are not looking for anything fancy or complicated. No multipurpose mechs. If we want the transition from second class to first class to go as smoothly as possible, the first-class living mechs should ideally comprise of straight conversions of familiar mech models such as the Bright Warrior, the Ferocious Piranha, the Transcendent Punisher, the Valkyrie Redeemer, the Red Axe, the Sting Ripper, and so on. If you can design first-class versions of them that possess the same feel and characteristics, then that would be great. I will see what I can do, VS said while exchanging another glance with his wife. Chapter 7152. The Future Treatment of Ascended Giants. VS was happy to hear that Kedis was seriously trying to uplift the expeditionary fleet into a first-class mech force. The expeditionary fleet had achieved amazing successes over the years. Its elite mech pilots had accrued a huge amount of experience and had become known as the top veterans operating in the middle zones. They all deserved a shot at piloting first-class mechs. They could use their rich experience and combat skills to much better use by trying to stall the aliens as they attempted to dismantle the critical defensive lines in the upper zones. The Larkinson clan could still fill up the gap left by the expeditionary fleet by forming a new second-class fleet. Although it wouldn't be as good as its predecessor, this new second-class mech force could still do its job of helping to defend the middle zones so long as it was led by a strong cadre of veterans, which the Larkinsons had in abundance. VS would welcome the addition of Kedis and the expeditionary fleet to the upper zones. The Larkinson clan would gain greater importance in high society and also gained a lot of redundancy. If the worst happened to the premier fleet, the Larkinsons could still rely on the other first-class fleet to protect all of their interests and deter opportunists from trying anything nefarious. The only part that bothered VS was that it would take an estimated 4 years to complete the uplift of the Larkinson contingent of the expeditionary fleet. Given how many radical changes occurred in the previous 4 years, VS fully expected the next 4 years to radically upend the Red Ocean, especially now that the mutated Vorabugs had exploded onto the scene. Whether it was possible to complete the massive uplift project and whether there was still a use for the new first-class mechs remained to be seen. There was not much VS could do to improve the situation. Perhaps he could approach Ilvain or the questionable prophets employed by the Red Collective to ask for glimpses of the future, but he knew that their visions could easily mislead him due to their lack of reliability. The Larkinson clan had little choice but to take a plunge in the unknown and lock in a multi-year commitment. Around 4 years later, VS and the other Larkinsons would find out whether the massive investment paid off for their clan. I will definitely work on upgrading our staple mech models to first class, VS promised to Kedis. However, I won't be able to start on them right away. My design schedule is already packed for the remainder of the year. More specifically, the premier fleet needs to field first-class multipurpose mechs designed in-house. I want to complete these jobs first before I tackle your request. Kedis nodded in understanding. Take your time. We are not in a hurry, considering that it will take more years for our second-class mech pilots to complete the necessary courses and train the required skills. Please take note that there is a limit to how much they can improve in a handful of years. Despite all of the support provided by our clan, not all of our second-class mech pilots possess the talent, the discipline, or the motivation to persist. First-class mechs are faster, more powerful, and more complex to operate regardless of how much you try to simplify them. The pilots who are least able to meet the elevated standards are the mech pilots who started off as third-raters. We are asking too much from this group. Third-class mech pilots learned only a fraction of the skills and knowledge that second-class mech pilots needed to master. Trying to make a second leap was far beyond them. They essentially had to go back to a mech academy and relearn everything but at a much higher tech level than before. While VS felt sympathetic towards third-raters who survived all of the previous battles and contributed so much to the rise of the Larkinson clan, it was not viable to coddle them if they failed to keep up at this point. The Larkinson clan had already stepped onto a bigger stage. It urgently needed to build up more first-class forces in order to maintain a measure of security in an increasingly more dangerous dwarf galaxy. The expeditionary fleet simply wasn't important enough anymore. Its main role these days was to serve as a backup and a talent factory, but both responsibilities could easily be undertaken by other units. Whatever the case, if there were Larkinsons who failed to grow any further for whatever reason, then the clan could always transfer them to one of the many second-class branches. The standards there would remain the same, and they also served as good places to retire or take it easy depending on their proximity to the front lines. VS did not meet with the two women in order to discuss the uplift of the expeditionary fleet. Once they ended their discussion on Ketty's big project, VS briefly explained his thoughts and issues with the upcoming leadership challenge. He already knew what Gloriana thought about it, but Ketty's had yet to voice her personal feelings. These ascended giants do not actually value honor in the same way as us. V's former student said with a frown. Your descriptions and explanations lead me to believe that their fixation on honor is hollow. Perhaps they believe that they are being honorable on the surface, but their bottom lines are actually much lower than they realize. The fact that these ascended giants are willing to forsake their old oaths and betray everyone who has invested them with so much power and resources shows that their actual sense of honor is extremely poor by our standards. What does that mean for us Kettys? It means that you shouldn't put your full trust in them. The ascended giants have lost the professional human soldier's strong sense of duty and sacrifice. They would never talk about creating their own race or joining the Red Cabal otherwise. Too many of them see red humans as cattle or slaves as opposed to their brothers and sisters. If you ever manage to take them over, you need to fix this problem right away. You cannot have these ascended giants think they are superior to regular humans every second of the day. VS let out an exasperated sigh. I know that, but this is easier said than done. All ascended giants are delusional, and while I definitely intend to deprogram their strange and weird ideas, I am afraid that much of it is already ingrained in their psyche. We can only make use of the forces we have, not the ones that appear in our dreams. The RC and I already have multiple ideas on how to make this work. They have become much more hierarchical and will try their best to follow the orders of their Polemarchos. So long as he is strong enough to occupy this rank. That is one of the traits about the ascended giants that you can exploit. Kettys analyzed. I can understand why they are so obsessed with strength and how it can make people desperate. All of those phase lords think that they have become the main characters of their own sagas. Everyone else is simply not as alive and valuable as them. This is why these ascended giants would feel little remorse if they end up joining the Red War on the side of the native aliens and begin killing lots of human troops. Their pride and perceived honor cause them to become prickly and way too prone to resorting to violent solutions after suffering minor slights. VS said as if he excused them for their mental changes. I will have to continue to maintain the strong act even if I win the leadership challenge. I can already foresee that it will be a nightmare to make sure that individual ascended giants do not individually defect to the native aliens under my watch. Is that not what your kinship networks are for? Kettys asked. Yes, but not to this degree of severity. Kinship networks operate best in groups that are already highly loyal as a whole. It is like a clear lake. Any sign of pollution will not only become easily noticeable, but solving this problem can also be done quickly, easily, and without any trouble. Yet what if we are not dealing with a clear lake? What if we are dealing with a lake that is already polluted from top to bottom? I can't clean out the majority of those 361 ascended giants. What I need to do is to nudge them back in the right direction, but counteracting so much pollution is a challenge. Gloriana had her own opinion on this subject. If a normal kinship network is inadequate for the purpose, can you implement a stronger one? I know it is possible. You need a kinship network that does more than encourage people to become loyal. It has to compel this quality in them. Strengthen its effect. VS looked shocked. Do you know what you are talking about? That crosses a line. You are suggesting a proposal that violates one of the most fundamental taboos of our civilization. I know, but so what? VS? Whatever force was responsible for turning them into pretender gods did it first. Do not look at it as a crime. Look at it as a correction. You are countering indoctrination with indoctrination. I see no reason why it would not work. You only need to ensure that the ascended giants do not get cold feet and desert before the network has time to reprogram them. Perhaps you should call them back first and make sure to surround them before issuing this demand. While his wife's proposal undoubtedly had promise, VS felt very ambivalent about it. He did not want to betray the rust that the Ascended Giants put into him by brainwashing them against their will. It might not work, he said. Phase Lord cultivation is intricately connected to the Red Ocean. Who knows whether they will believe in their own godhood again whenever their phase water concentration reaches another threshold. As long as they remain connected to the enhanced kinship network, it should be able to detect what is happening and give you time to restrict the movements of the phase lord in question. Gloriana retorted. Then you only need to wait for the network to do its job over time. As long as it is strong enough, it should be able to undo the damage. The way she spoke about reprogramming the minds of the Ascended Giants sounded quite eerie to VS. She no longer treated them as individuals. She treated them as bots that regularly got corrupted by outside influences. Although VS knew he could not afford to be soft-hearted towards the Ascended Giants, he truly did not want to mistreat them to this degree. There was another problem. The Dark Apostle definitely wouldn't like this proposal, as he identified much more with the Ascended Giants than Red humanity. It may turn into a huge topic of contention once he was able to voice his opinions. What do you think, Kedis? He asked in the hopes of getting a second opinion. The Swordmaster responded with a quiet voice. If the Ascended Giants aspire to form their own race that is separate from Red humanity, then technically you don't have to extend human rights to them anymore. Let them form their own race if they want it so badly. Enslave them right afterwards. Make sure that they all become foot soldiers and cannon fodder in our war against the native aliens and the mutated Vorabugs. We need all of the bodies we can get, and we can't always get them by being the nice guys. What an extreme opinion. There was a certain cold logic to Keddy's argument, but VS knew that it would lead to a huge amount of political repercussions. There was no way the Red Collective would accept such a radical solution. Perhaps the Kalis and the rest of Red humanity might agree to implement this proposal if the Ascended Giants had already defected to the Red Cabal. Even then, it was easier to execute them and start over with a new batch of human phase lords. Chapter 7153. Resources are meant to be used. The subject on how to control the Ascended Giants in the event that VS won the leadership challenge already induced a headache. VS did not look forward to tackling this issue, but he could not avoid it if he and the Dark Apostle gained control over the Phase Lord department. Becoming its department head meant assuming responsibility over the Ascended Giants. Their problems became his problems. VS and his alter ego needed to make the hard choices in order to make sure the Phase Lord department continued to occupy a productive place in human society. Though VS loathed it, he realized that implementing an enhanced kinship network may ultimately be the gentlest out of a collection of bad solutions. Implementing it would violate the rights of the Ascended Giants, but then again they were not quite human anymore. They had more in common with dangerous exobeasts, which demanded a lot of restrictions in order to keep them in check. The Larkinson Biotech Institute even had to cull the mutated beasts it kept under captivity because the cost of containing them began to exceed any reasonable expectations of profiting off their unique evolution. He inwardly shook his head. There was no need for him to solve these problems just yet. He first needed to tackle the immediate issue first before he could think about subsequent problems. Who knew whether these ideas would turn useless if he lost the leadership challenge? As you may have already surmised, I called you here in order to find out whether you can lend me a hand with the leadership challenge, he said. I am about to browse the Divine Bazaar and the Tree of Possibilities for goods and enlightenment fruits that can give me an extra boost in the upcoming duels. However, you need more AP. Gloriana already guessed his motivations. Yes. Neither Kedis nor Gloriana were amused by this request. You came way too late, VS. The wielder of the Heavens Word said. The two of us have already completed a few small marathons and painstakingly earned the ascension points needed to upgrade the Dimension Observatory and open a larger and more long-lasting Dimension Breach. I already invested 100 AP into Breach Expansion Level 2 in order to increase the maximum height and width of the dimensional portal by 5 meters each. And I fulfilled the demand that you imposed on me well on time. Gloriana mentioned with a hint of pride in her voice. I worked hard and solved all sorts of difficult and tedious missions in order to accumulate 500 AP. The instant I reached this threshold, I spent it all on Breach Extension Level 3, which grants us the option to extend the longevity of the Dimension Breaches to 5 standard days. VS swept his gaze back and forth between his wife and his former student. So, how much AP do you currently have in your accounts? 13 AP. Gloriana answered. 414 AP. Kedis responded. Before you think about laying claim on any of my points, 400 AP is already reserved for the Dimension Breach that I intend to open next. I have already given out hints and told the Larkinson clan to make advanced preparations. Many parties have gathered at the current location of the expeditionary fleet in anticipation of an imminent mining rush into the blue dimension. If I spend my AP for your benefit, then that will massively delay the next opening. 400 AP was a large sum. Kedis could easily spend it on 1 or 2 decent enlightenment fruits that could give VS much more solid fighting skills. She could also exchange it for interesting gadgets or raw materials that could give the Dark Apostle an edge in combat. Yet instead of spending it all on those items, Kedis was adamant about using her current reserve for its intended purpose, which was to significantly expand Red Humanity's stockpile of superdimensional matter. In a few days, Kedis would once again appear in public while pretending to use the Heavens Word to create a larger and much more long-lasting gateway into the blue dimension. It was not an exaggeration that all of Red Humanity was holding its breath for this critical opportunity. Superdimensional matter was crucial to upgrading God pilots to the next level while strengthening Red Humanity's ability to counter enemy phase leaders. The Red Cabal had already begun to distribute more products made out of alien-grade superdimensional matter to its phase lords. If Red Humanity did not keep up in this arms race, then its forces would suffer increasingly more damage and lose more battles over time. Entire territories might fall and billions of humans would perish. Both VS and Kedis could easily figure out the consequences of opening a dimension breach in time or delaying it by several weeks or even months. This was why VS felt ashamed for making a request that sounded painfully selfish and short-sighted. It was not. Control over the Phase Lord Department ought to be worth at least a modest haul of superdimensional matter. If VS and the Red Collective truly regained control over all of the rebellious and unruly Ascended Giants, then that could help the war effort just as well as the addition of a dozen superdimensional ace mechs. What about giving me half? VS asked. With 200 AP you can create a dimension breach that is just as large but will only last a single day. I know it sounds bad to lose 4 whole days of extra mining time, but this is the same duration as last time, which means that nobody will know that you had a better option. We can always make up for the lost opportunities to mine additional superdimensional matter in the future. An opportunity to conquer the Ascended Giants and put them at our disposal only comes once. While his argument may sound decent, neither woman looked convinced. Kedis flatly rejected his proposal. Forget about it, VS. You didn't have to accept this leadership challenge. Do you even understand how sacred it is? You are about to undertake a ritual where you prove your qualifications to lead a group of warriors by proving you are better than them. The challenge is deliberately difficult in order to make the results convincing enough. Only a leader that is strong enough, clever enough, and tenacious enough to endure all of the difficulties can earn the approval of the warriors in question. By accepting this challenge when you are not even certain when your strength and fighting skills are up to par is both arrogant and disrespectful. Her rebuke slightly worsened V's mood. He did not consider himself to be a warrior, so he did not take her criticism to heart. Yet he still felt a little guilty for letting his greed overtake his good sense. Not that his decision would have been any different at the time. The potential gains were too alluring. If he failed, then at least he made an honest attempt. He would not forgive himself for skipping this opportunity when he had a chance to succeed. Gloriana's gaze towards VS grew increasingly more judgmental. How much AP do you have right now? Just 41 AP. Yeah, I know. I screwed up. I didn't spend as much time on completing missions in the past few months as I should have. VS feebly defended himself in front of the two women. Look on the bright side. At least you two managed to earn hundreds of AP with my help. If I did not graciously allow you to pick the best and most attainable missions every refresh period, then you wouldn't have been able to get this far. That is a lame excuse and you know it, VS. Gloriana practically growled. Kedis recalled something different. You are not entirely without options. Haven't you mentioned in the past that you have kept a number of lottery tickets in reserve? This appears to be the right time to make use of them. What tickets do you have left? 9 golden lottery tickets and 1 radiant lottery ticket. VS responded as he indeed recalled he had kept them in reserve. While it is true that I can pull good stuff out of them, the results are always at least semi-random. Golden lottery tickets rarely yield truly good prizes, and the radiant lottery ticket can deliver a powerful prize but doesn't always fit my needs. The last radiant lottery ticket that I used at the wishing fountain gave me the flower parasol of all possibilities. That worked out well in the end now that you have turned it into the basis for Marigold. His wife mentioned. I know, but that is a completely different matter. What I need are solutions that fit my current needs and are immediately useful. The lottery draws cannot guarantee these results. Neither women took his complaints seriously. I do not think it makes much sense for you to save those lottery tickets for a future opportunity. Kedis personally judged. You are just hoarding them if you do not spend them right now. You should at least use up the radiant lottery ticket first. If I was in your shoes, I would try to aim for an enlightenment fruit related to spearmanship. Regardless of what the wishing fountain ultimately spits out, at least you get a fruit that can improve your fighting skills. Even if it is not what you were aiming for, you can still change your plans to adapt to what you have gained. Then there are the 9 golden lottery tickets. The chance that you can get a decent prize out of at least one of them should be quite good. VS looked conflicted. A radiant lottery ticket was precious. That was not in doubt. He obtained the original Grand Dynamo Elixir from one. He also acquired the mysterious Irvink Obelisk. He went on to fold the benefits of both into Blinky and his remarkable chi cultivation method. Although much of his potential was locked in the far future, the Star Cat was undoubtedly one of the most remarkable companion spirits in existence. Only Emma far surpassed Blinky in might and energy usage. A radiant lottery ticket could also yield powerful high-level artifacts such as the ocean collar and the flower parasol. These were ready-made objects that were marked with lots of mysterious runes. They possessed a wealth of powerful features and could do wonders to the right wielders. It was unfortunate that the 2 high-level relics that he obtained by using up radiant lottery tickets failed to fit his needs. He was at least able to transfer an upgraded version of the flower parasol to his daughter. The ocean collar remained dormant in the vault of eternity. VS had stalled in his attempt to master the water element. While the ocean collar made for a convenient staff that could scale up to any size when fed with enough E-energy, it was not meant to be used as a blunt instrument. He was ultimately not the right wielder of this precious artifact. All of these examples illustrated how getting anything immediately useful out of the wishing fountain was completely random. That may be the point of this facility, but that did not mean VS had to like it. The system could screw him over in many different ways. It was this fear of getting a useless prize that made him reluctant to expend this resource. Yet, the 2 women were right. The current problem at hand demanded that VS use up whatever he kept in reserve. If his ascension points were not sufficient enough to cover his needs, then he had little choice but to let the wishing fountain decide his fate. Fine, he grumbled. I will use up the lottery tickets, but not right now. I still want to browse the Divine Bazaar and the Tree of Possibilities to see what is available and what I can aim for when I reach the wishing fountain. Chapter 7154. Prospecting Other Dimensions. VS Kedis and Gloriana toured the system space. They browsed the various goods on offer that could make a difference in the upcoming leadership challenge. Given his modest budget, VS mainly directed his attention towards pill potions, elixirs, and other consumables that could give him a temporary boost in strength. Chi Restoration Potion. Price, 80 Ascension Points. Ingesting this potion will quickly restore the Chi energy state of a cultivator while also generating a temporary state of heightened focus. When the active effects have passed, weaker cultivators will crash and remain exhausted for several days. I have tried one of these potions out in the past. He told the accompanying women. It works as advertised. It is truly worth the AP if you use it when you are tired but still have to finish the fight. If it wasn't so damn expensive, I would have felt tempted to purchase one right away. The Chi Restoration Potion did not interest Gloriana at all, considering that she was a pure civilian, but Kedis might have a good use for it in the future. 80 AP is not a small sum. The Swordmaster looked almost pained. I still need to improve my own design skills, and the Dimension Observatory demands its due as well. I have to earn 400 AP to open up another gateway to the Blue Dimension next time. I can't afford to spend 80 AP on this luxury item, particularly when I am already thinking about diversifying my offerings. VS turned to Kedis. What did you just say? You heard right. Kedis grinned back at him. Ever since the Red 3 opened up their eyes to the possibility that there are high-quality resources that are ripe for the picking in the higher dimensions, they have offered to help me research and prospect them in order to learn whether they contain materials that can offer comparable benefits to superdimensional matter. Once they have found a few good leads, I will spend a few AP to make use of the Dimension Telescope to take a peek at them. It only costs 5 AP to do so. If I like what I see, I can spend 10 or 50 AP to open a short-lasting portal that can allow us to retrieve samples. Only then will we be able to confirm for certain whether the new dimensions are worth exploiting. That sounded like a sound game plan. VS particularly liked it that Kedis managed to entice the Red 3 to do most of the groundwork themselves. Kedis had done her own legwork in order to pin down the Blue Dimension, but this was not a good use of her time. It was much better to let the professionals of the Red 3 spend a huge amount of time and manpower on this task. She just needed to save up a bit of AP to confirm whether the research results were accurate before preparing to launch a full mining expedition in the newly discovered dimension. While VS found this promising, he doubted whether it was worth spending the extra AP on this endeavor. Hitting the Blue Dimension has already introduced huge advancements in human tech and top-level combat power, he said. Right now there isn't nearly enough mid-grade and high-grade superdimensional matter to go around. In my opinion, it is best to focus on opening up periodic portals into the 365th dimension so that practically every ace mech is upgraded with at least a bit of superdimensional matter. Kedis pursed her lips. I do not necessarily disagree with you, but given how much we depend on senior ace mechs and god mechs to guarantee the existence of our race, I think it is important to keep finding more superclass materials that work on different principles than superdimensional matter. What if there are much more powerful hyper-materials hidden in a higher dimension? If we can discover where we can find these resources, I can open a portal to their location and give Red humanity another way to further increase the hard power of their best assets. It was ultimately a question of quality or quantity. V's argument favored focusing on mining superdimensional matter in order to make it more accessible to Red humanity. Letting every ace mech gain access to superdimensional matter would be extremely helpful in stopping the enemy phase leaders and assault fleets from overrunning the contested border regions. As far as VS was concerned, Red humanity urgently needed to stem its short-term losses and regain stability in order to prevent its economy and industries from collapsing any further. Kedis, on the other hand, paid more attention to the future phases of the arms race between Red humanity and the native aliens. The phase whales of the Red Cabal were producing as many Saint Piercers and Saint Armors as they could manage. They would eventually become so ubiquitous that every greater phase lord and phase whale made use of superdimensional gear. Even if the material quality of alien-grade superdimensional alloy was not the best, they were still competitive enough to give phase leaders a chance to fight and win the human champions, especially if they enjoyed a numbers advantage. There is another important reason why Kedis' new initiative has received so much support, especially from the Red Association. Gloriana said, "Our community is still rife with peak ace pilots that have stalled before they could step onto the road to no return. God pilot candidates such as the Mace of Retaliation lack the confidence to survive the most dangerous breakthroughs of their lives. The introduction of superdimensional matter has given them a small measure of hope, as a better machine can help them survive the infamous mech-body merger process. If we can find more superclass materials to upgrade their mechs even further, we can potentially raise the success rate by 5 to 10%, which can result in 2 or 3 additional God pilots emerging in the next decade." Though VS questioned her numbers, he could not argue with her overall logic. She was right. According to Kedis' increasingly more accepted Heaven-Earth-Man trifecta, upgrading the Earth score could indeed help people increase their chances of breaking through. Although God pilots also had to satisfy high standards in the other 2 criteria, a stronger mech always helped. VS looked thoughtful. "If that is the case, then I agree with you. Diversifying your high-quality offerings can potentially make a huge difference. We urgently need more God pilots, especially since it appears that they are the only combatants that are capable of completely cleansing a star system of a Vorabug infestation. One of the most annoying traits of the mutated Vorabugs was that once they entered a star system, they could never be repelled without investing a disproportionate amount of time and combat assets into sweeping every planet, moon, and asteroid belt. Given that most star systems contained an astronomical amount of asteroids, it was simply impractical to fully sweep the latter. Just the asteroids orbiting the star systems past the further planets alone covered a huge amount of space. Just a single Vorabug could sneak into these distant asteroids and procreate. A swarm of Vorabugs would emerge in no time and spread themselves across the mostly barren rocks, allowing them to multiply at an exponential rate. Fortunately, their reproduction speed in the outer reaches of a star system was much less dramatic in practice. The energy of the local stars was so much weaker than the Vorabugs were not able to absorb as much energy from local radiation or from the frozen rocks. That heavily limited their activity levels. Fundamental biological processes such as digestion, growth, and reproduction all needed to be fed with energy in order to take place. Unless the asteroids contained resources that could easily be burned, in order to produce energy, the Vorabugs were not able to bring billions of their numbers to bear against defenders that had already won an earlier incursion. That did not mean that this threat could be neglected either. So long as the star systems had not been fully swept, they would continue to produce periodic outbreaks whenever the dormant Vorabugs had quietly restored their numbers without interruption. This was one of the reasons why VS considered the mutated Vorabugs to be the greater threat. They were difficult to fully eradicate and did not easily let go of their territories. Allow them to take root long enough and they would definitely extract all of the valuable resources from the natural satellites, leaving nothing useful left to Red humanity if they ever managed to recapture the star systems. Let's get back to browsing the items on offer, VS said as he shoved his concerns related to the mutated Vorabugs to the side. There has to be something decent available for cheap. If there was, the Divine Bazer certainly did not make it easy. The consumables on offer that were potent enough to benefit the Dark Apostle during the upcoming duels were all prices out of his meager budget. Astral Energy Condenser Pill. Price 100 Ascension Points. Ingesting this pill will cause a temporary transformation that allows a cultivator to absorb astral energy at a much greater degree of effectiveness. Astral energy possesses great power at higher quantities and can be used to amplify existing techniques or fuel powerful astral techniques. Instant Reflex Boost Potion. Price 60 Ascension Points. Ingesting this potion will temporarily amplify the physical reflexes and reaction speed of a cultivator. The duration and performance increase is dependent on the existing strength of the recipient. When the active effects have passed, weaker cultivators will become subject to exhaustion and soreness. These consumables sound useful, but I don't have that much AP to spend, VS said as he regretfully turned away from the pill and potion. What about this sharpening stone, VS? Gloriana called as she gestured for him to a particular booth. Hyzine Sharpening Stone. Price 10 Ascension Points. A sharpening stone created and used by the Hyzine, an ancient brotherhood of swordsmen who sought to train themselves into breaking 10,000 laws with their swords. The Hyzine were convinced that the best way to break every enemy and obstacle in their path was to sharpen their swords to the point where they can cut the immaterial as easily as the material. The Hyzine Sharpening Stone is made out of a special combination of exotic and hypermaterials that, when used with a specific technique, is able to physically sharpen most swords to the point where they gain a monomolecular edge. VS had already come across this stone when he visited the Divine Bazaar in the past. It was a fairly cheap item all considered. It is useless to VS. Kedis voiced her opinion as she examined the sharpening stone with a critical gaze. Duels between phase lords always start with trying to deplete the spatial barrier. This is an energy barrier that cannot be pierced with a sharp blade unless it is made out of superdimensional matter. If the rules allow for the use of superdimensional weapons, then this stone might be of use, but since that is not the case, I advise you not to bother. I don't understand the working principles of this item, but the enhancement is definitely temporary. The blade will dull long before it can be used to pierce through an enemy phase lord's raiment. VS shrugged. That's what you get for just 10 AP. There was no miracle solution available in the Divine Bazaar. While VS could still buy a couple of decent enhancements, their effectiveness was questionable. He did not think it was worthwhile for him to squander his limited AP on these minor boosts. VS and the women began to climb up the steps until they reached the Tree of Possibilities. Hopefully we can find an affordable enlightenment fruit that is relevant enough to be useful. While most of the good stuff cost at least hundreds of ascension points, the Tree of Possibilities always offered a good selection of cheaper enlightenment fruits. Of course, most of them did not impart any combat-related methods, which made them useless to his current situation. Chapter 7155. Bargain Bin Fruit Mass Release Day, January 5th. VS believed that the Tree of Possibilities was the most useful facility of the Mech Designer system. The other two users readily agreed with him. The ability to infuse knowledge reflexes and to a lesser extent muscle memory into his mind, body, and spirit was an incredible time saver. Humans were tool users, which meant that mastering knowledge was one of the best ways to enable its soldiers to gain strength. VS had received countless benefits from the knowledge infusions acquired through the system. It had saved his hide more than once in the past. He hoped that it could do so again. When he appeared at the clearing that hosted the magical tree, his gaze immediately fixated on an enlightenment fruit with a very specific shape and coloration. He had dreamt about it so often that he was able to recognize it instantly among hundreds of other dangling fruits. Gloriana quickly noticed his interest in this particular offering. Divine Blacksmith Records. Price: 975 Ascension Points. Imparts a large collection of related smithing recipes and techniques developed by a divine blacksmith. The majority of techniques consist of special hammering methods that can impart metallic and organic materials with special properties. The smithing recipes contain many combinations that enable a craftsman to forge powerful materials with the infusion of special energies and materials into a work. I can see why you are attracted to this fruit, she said in a mild tone. How long have you been pining for it? You only need to earn 934 more ascension points to afford this fruit. You need to work much harder and refrain from spending your points elsewhere if you want to acquire it. Can you even persist? Probably not, VS admitted with a sigh. There is just too much stuff that is more affordable and more useful to me. I know that the system is generally stingy, but it never truly underpriced its own goods. I have a strong belief that absorbing this enlightenment fruit can completely revolutionize my craftsmanship and my works, but Kedis shook her head. It is too expensive. This is a high-end enlightenment fruit that is clearly aimed towards users that have already become good enough to earn hundreds of AP with relative ease. I have been eyeing this particular fruit as well in order to learn how to forge the best sword artifacts, but there is too much stuff I need more. I still need to spend my AP on basic enlightenment fruits that can strengthen my foundation as a mech designer. I also need to earn 400 AP on a regular basis in order to create portals that lead to the blue dimension and hopefully other dimensions. There is no way for me to justify an expenditure as large as this at this time. They all turned away from the Divine Blacksmith Records enlightenment fruit in order to avoid its temptation. VS could almost swear that the system deliberately dangled it from the Tree of Possibilities in order to tease him and encourage him to earn more AP. Let's look at stuff that can strengthen my spearmanship, he said. There is a lot of useful stuff here, but we should focus on strengthening my foundation rather than learn exotic new powers. I need stuff that can hold up in a battle between two physically imposing phase lords. They did just that. It took time to go over every individual fruit and figure out whether they fit the criteria or not. Many of them sadly did not. Most of them were either unaffordable or did not impart the right set of skills and knowledge. That did not mean that VS ignored all of the unsuitable fruits. He still took note of ones that looked interesting but always fell way outside his meager budget. Perhaps he could aim for them when he used up his radiant lottery ticket. The Stormlord's Spear Inheritance. Price: 350 Ascension Points. Imparts the inheritance of a peerless warlord who used to be hailed as the Stormlord. The inheritance imparts a full set of chi techniques, thorough understanding and initiation of how to summon the power of storms along with its constituent concepts such as lightning and wind while wielding a spear in battle. The Stormlord's inheritance possesses a strong offensive focus and centers around launching continuous attacks. Each strike of the spear builds up a charge in the surrounding environment that can slowly turn into a raging storm that can overwhelm champions and sweep apart entire armies of enemies. The Stormlord's approach towards combat excels at breaking down the protection of particularly resilient opponents, but performs poorly when the practitioner is forced to defend against incoming attacks. Since this enlightenment fruit contains a complete inheritance, it also contains a remnant of the Stormlord himself. Aspiring inheritors must pass its test and earn its approval in order to access its most powerful finishing techniques. Damn. This is the first time I have seen an enlightenment fruit that contains an inheritance as luxurious as this. VS said as he studied the Stormlord's Spear Inheritance Enlightenment Fruit. If it truly contains a remnant of this Stormlord fellow, I may be able to take it out and turn it into a design spirit. His wife did not like the sound of that. It is best to let the dead enjoy their rest. I do not think it is a good idea to revive an ancient warlord even if he is human. Who knows how much his values clash with modern human civilization. He may have more in common with the ascended giants than us. Will he be willing to help you defeat them if that is the case? You're probably right. It is best not to take the risk. He went back to his search. A moment later Gloriana encountered another desirable enlightenment fruit that was unfortunately outside of her husband's spending range. Look over here, VS. This is exactly what you need, I think. The Lonely Spearmaster Manual. Price. 150 Ascension Points. Imparts the technique and philosophy of the Lonely Spearmaster, a famed duelist who has developed a self-made spear style. While his self-made techniques lack the elemental refinements of many other weapon styles, it possesses excellent basic spear-wielding techniques that are versatile and can be applied in many different combat scenarios. The Lonely Spearmaster's combat approach possesses a strong emphasis on survival and counterattacks. A practitioner of his spear style primarily focuses on blunting an enemy's offensive and waits for the right moments to parry and counterattack. This spear style performs well in most duels against single opponents but fares worse when fighting against multiple enemies. You're right. It does look appropriate for my current needs. VS could see the attraction in this fruit. It was quite reasonably priced. If he was able to scrounge up 110 AP, he would have felt tempted to redeem it right away. Unfortunately, he could not even muster up this amount in a short amount of time. He had no choice but to turn away or hope that one of his golden lottery tickets could deliver it to him later today. Perhaps he could use his radiant lottery ticket to aim for this enlightenment fruit, but that would most certainly waste the potential of the former. Radiant lottery tickets could yield prizes of much greater value than an enlightenment fruit that VS could readily obtain for 150 AP. VS shook his head. The value of this enlightenment fruit sits in an awkward range. It is too cheap for a radiant lottery ticket, but it is too expensive to fall within my meager budget. I probably won't be able to learn the Lonely Spearmaster's tricks anytime soon. They continued their search. There were not a lot of enlightenment fruits that primarily taught weapon fighting skills, and there were even less that imparted spearmanship in particular. While there were a number of cheap enlightenment fruits that promised to impart knowledge on how to fight with knife swords and so on, VS deliberately ignored these offerings. He would rather master a single weapon than become mediocre in wielding two different weapon types. He admired the strength of Venerable Devia Stark, Venerable Rosa Orphan, and Saint Dice. They were the most solid proof of how mastery in a single weapon type could elevate them to success. That did not mean that wielders of multiple weapon systems were inferior, but VS knew that he could not allocate enough time and resources into mastering so many different combat methods. It was better to tighten his focus and ensure that the Dark Apostle possessed the qualifications to become a real champion. The Sacrificial Spear Throwing Method. Price, 35 Ascension Points. Imparts a technique and weapon design developed by a forgotten spear tribe that can inflict great damage at a cost. By concentrating fire energy into the tip of a specially made spear or other polearm that is already attuned with the fire element, the weapon can explode upon impact with an obstacle. The higher the quality and the more fire energy it can accommodate, the greater the blast radius and blast power of the explosion. It is advisable to throw the spear as opposed to holding it in order to avoid getting affected by the violent discharge. The spear used to launch this attack will be destroyed after releasing a blast. Only fragments of the weapon can be salvaged. This may be just what you need to finish off an opponent during a close fight. Kedis said with clear interest in this fruit. You will need to design and make a spear or javelin that is specifically designed to work with fire energy in an explosive capacity. That might eat away at your mass allowance, but the power of this may be strong enough to make it worthwhile. VS felt a little more conflicted. I have a suspicion that my mastery of the fire element will have a great influence over the potency of this technique. My comprehension of the fire element is not that impressive, to be honest. It is considerably worse than my understanding of the water element, and it is far below my affinity towards the darkness element. So you will turn away from this fruit? Maybe. Let's keep it in reserve. It can still be useful if I can put my own spin on the technique. Let's look at the remaining fruits. If there is nothing better, I will think about redeeming it. Using it may be costly, but the Red Collective has promised to supply me with most of the raw materials I need. I am more than willing to sacrifice a good weapon if I end up as a winner in the end. They continued to examine the other enlightenment fruits that fell within his budget. Only a handful more promised to teach him how to impart one skill or another related to spearmanship, but they were all lacking in potency. VS already knew that what he would get out of these fruits would overlap with the spearmanship that he had already acquired from a previous enlightenment fruit. He eventually decided to turn back to the sacrificial spear throwing method enlightenment fruit. Sacrificing an artifact for a momentary boost in power is a legitimate tactic. Kedis said as she understood V's dilemma. You are not used to treating your works as consumables, but there are times when there are no better options. Regardless, if you attempt to pull a better enlightenment fruit from the wishing fountain, you should at least secure this method so that you have at least one strong finisher at your disposal. The lack of finishing moves can very well spell the difference between victory and defeat in duels. She should know, considering that she was far away the best fighter out of the 3 mech designers. VS hesitated for a dozen or so seconds but eventually decided to redeem the enlightenment fruit. Here goes nothing. He bit into his newly acquired fruit. Chapter 7156. The potential of exploding products. The enlightenment fruit did not impart as much knowledge as most other fruits. This was to be expected, as it only really focused on imparting a single method. However, what the sacrificial spear throwing method lacked in breadth, it made up for it in depth. It went deep into the theory, the philosophy, the mindset, the artifact design, and the chi manipulation techniques needed to turn any specially prepared spear into an explosive warhead. VS gained an immediate boost in his understanding of the fire element, with a particular emphasis on its explosive properties. This was a welcome addition, and one that would prove quite handy in combination with the other stuff he acquired. The enlightenment fruit also taught him very narrow applications on how to design and build the right spears. While it did not teach him any runes, it taught him how to identify certain properties of exotics and hypermaterials that were naturally conducive to producing explosions. By combining them and mixing it with more stable materials as buffers, VS could end up producing a powerful spear that remained inert unless he pumped it full with fire energy. Of course, it was not that simple to arm the spear this way. Doing so would make it way too prone to accidental explosions. Worse, other individuals, which also included enemies, could pump it full of fire energy and cause it to explode ahead of time. In order to ensure the spear remained safe to use while also making it possible to prime it on command, VS had to combine materials into a refined structural arrangement by using special weaponsmithing techniques, only some of which Vulcan already mastered. These additional processes not only resulted in a more natural and optimal fusion between different exotics and hypers, but also increased the energy capacity of the spear tip and in some cases the shaft as well. They could temporarily exceed their normal capacities and become filled with so much excess fire energy that the resulting explosions would be cataclysmic, especially when the inclusion of highly volatile and exothermic exotic materials massively fed these reactions. Aside from that, VS valued the fighting techniques that came with the enlightenment fruit. It was anything but complete, but it did teach him a crucial capability: how to throw his polearm. He could feel his true body shift and vibrate as it rapidly integrated the muscle memory of how to throw his spear with both his left and right hands. He also learned how to significantly extend the reach of this move by employing simple spear-throwing mechanisms that he could embed into the spear itself. Of course, this was a primitive solution for a time when ancient cultivators lacked the amenities of modern human technology. VS could easily design a more powerful and consistent spear launching mechanism that he could embed within his raiment. As long as he did not have to throw his spears on a repeated basis, he could easily amplify the power of these launching mechanisms and make sure they propelled his spear as far and as hard as possible. It would be even better if he amplified this move with the help of compatible phase water organs. One idea that came to mind was to use his recently acquired lesser Acres organ to build up a powerful electrical charge in a makeshift mass driver contraption. The power of electromagnetism could be used to instantly propel the spear forward, driving it out as if it was an extra long and heavy Gauss profile. He had already begun to combine his recently acquired knowledge with his established know-how. The combination between the two produced surprising ideas and opportunities. Many puzzles that confounded VS in the past suddenly became clear in his mind. As VS completed the initial digestion of the enlightenment fruit, he opened his eyes and let out a satisfied breath. This is a good enlightenment fruit. It is definitely worth 35 ascension points. The only regret is that I did not learn how to wield a spear more skillfully in combat outside of learning how to throw it. I could probably give the divine harpoon a run for his money on this front. Knowing how to throw a spear was far from enough to win a duel, in his opinion. He needed to be able to resist such a powerful opponent hidden with martial skill in order to be able to whittle down his or her defenses to the point where the use of a finisher move could guarantee victory. Show me, Kedis demanded. Now? Yes. I want to see your technique and determine whether your newly gained ability to throw a spear is good enough to be used in a serious duel. It took a bit of time to get his hands on a rod that could approximate a spear. When VS held it in his hands, he found himself a bit more comfortable with it. He could easily apply the staff fighting techniques that he learned in the past. If he pretended that one end was sharp, then he could work with that as well, though only with the most basic of moves. Now a new tool had been added to his kit. He soon shifted his stance and adjusted his grip on the rod. He looked further ahead and began to run forward in order to build up more momentum. At the right timing, VS seemingly hurled his entire throwing arm and torso like a wind-up toy, causing him to impart a lot of force into his weapon. The rod launched forward and soared through the skies before ultimately colliding against the surface of the mountain. Kedis raised her eyebrows. She looked mildly impressed. That is a good throw. Accurate as well. I can definitely imagine that you, or rather your alternate self, would sink your weapon deep into the body of an injured phase lord, especially if you use the right tech and materials. Gloriana did not have much expertise in combat, but even a laywoman like her could see that VS had momentarily looked handsome when he threw that rod with all of his effort. The Ascended Giants likely look down on the use of rifles and cannons due to their primitive sensibilities, but they shouldn't have any complaints if you throw your weapons instead. The Divine Harpoon sounds as if he has even made this his main source of strength and he is in charge of the largest phalanx. It would be the aid of hypocrisy if your future subjects reject your use of spear throws when they have been fine with the head of the Faceless Giants all this time. If that was the case, then VS might have to cancel his plans to devise an electromagnetic spear launching device. Such a weapon would inevitably be treated as dishonorable tech. This was problematic as VS needed to earn their approval in order to take over as their new leader. He decided to set this matter back and see what he could do later on. Perhaps the use of an old-fashioned otlotl or spear thrower would not provoke too much alarm, as if it was only a single handheld tool that gave him more leverage onto the spear. He could even upgrade it in subtle ways, such as integrating a spring mechanism or making the electromagnetic acceleration as low-key as possible. Can you pass me the knowledge that you have acquired from the Enlightenment Fruit? Gloriana requested. I can, but it will just be raw data and information, he said as he already went to work. You won't be able to learn all of the theory in an instant, let alone acquire the trained reflexes and muscle memory that make it really possible to employ my new theories and techniques in practice. That is fine. What I want to learn are alternate insights towards E-energy radiation and studying the principles behind different interactions. I am also interested in studying the associated design schematics. It should definitely hold valuable insights that can help us design better mechs. You're right. VS affirmed her guess. My understanding of hyper-technology and etechnology has become more refined. I especially know what stuff can cause products to become more volatile. I can also reverse that and make a mech or other product less prone to blowing up in a catastrophic fashion. That may save lives in the future. Can you also use your newfound knowledge to induce an entire mech to explode without the use of any obvious propellants? VS hadn't thought about that yet. He frowned as he thought about it. Technically yes, but practically I am not there yet. I need to process what I have learned and see how it intersects with mech design. I would have to purposefully design a volatile mech that can turn into a massive explosive vessel under the right conditions. I am afraid that the mech will suffer a performance hit in most parameters in order to accommodate this extra function. The explosion will be really powerful, though I think that there is a lot of room for improvement if I attempt to design and make such a mech on the spot. He wished he acquired this knowledge before he completed the final Glory project. He could already think of numerous different ways to significantly increase the explosive yield of the very basic sacrifice mech that he designed and released a while ago. Here you go, he finally said. He finished packing all of the information granted by the Enlightenment Fruit and proceeded to transmit the data package to the two women. He was able to do this because his mind was partially digitized. Much of the gains from the Enlightenment Fruit consisted of raw information that could easily be converted into virtual documents that he could send to others. This way both Kedis and Gloriana received all of the theory on the sacrificial spear throwing method. What VS was not able to transmit was his artificially acquired understanding and mastery of all of the theory. While he did not understand all of the explanations at the level of a true god who had mastered the knowledge in depth, he could easily match a normal specialist in the specific field. That was already good enough for VS as far as he was concerned. There were other limitations. He was incapable of transferring his increased affinity and comprehension to the fire element. That was much more mysterious. Even if he tried to explain his insights in plain standard language, the two women wouldn't necessarily get it due to differences in how they perceived the universe. What he was also unable to convey was the reflexes, muscle memory, and technical skill imparted by the Enlightenment Fruit. This was one of the qualities that made Enlightenment Fruits superior to other knowledge transmission systems. Fortunately, neither Kedis nor Gloriana urgently needed all of that extra stuff. They mainly grew interested in the theories and exploding spear designs. Interesting, Gloriana said as her much more superior cranial implant suite enabled her to go through the data package much faster. This is useful to me as well. It will be much more difficult to combine these theories with Archimechs, but it is theoretically possible to turn them into self-destructive machines. The upper limit should be even higher due to their greater material densities. Kedis had less use for what she learned. I am not so eager to turn my mechs into explosive munitions. There may be a use case for exploding swords. Perhaps I will design and fabricate a batch of expendable sword fei for the first sword Mark III. In fact, have you ever thought about combining these methods with superdimensional matter? If you can turn all of that extra dimensional mass into an explosive reactant, you can theoretically create a hand grenade that is powerful enough to destroy a first-class mech in a single massive explosion. Both VS and Gloriana looked astonished. They hadn't formed this connection yet. Now that the idea crossed their minds, they realized that the Swordmaster's idea was not completely unrealistic. Chapter 7157 Bonus Prize. Chapter 7157 Bonus Prize. This was what he liked the most about acquiring new knowledge, and especially through enlightenment fruits. The new theories and insights may initially come in a self-contained package, but as soon as they settled into his mind, they began to cross-pollinate with each other. Brand new connections formed when none existed before. The wisdom of scientists and scholars of the past crossed paths with brand new technological advancements. The availability of new materials and production methods introduced a wealth of new possibilities to old tech. This was what happened to VS as the cross-pollination process continued to produce one benefit after another. The basic premise of the sacrificial spear throwing method was to infuse specially developed spears with fire energy before throwing them out, causing them to explode and inflict great damage at their destinations. Since this was a method based on ancient cultivation science, it did not involve anything approaching modern science and propellants. Instead, it utilized the materials that used to be abundant and fairly easy to convert into explosive reactants. Those ancient creation cultivators figured out the theory and a series or recipes that enabled them to turn special combinations of exotics and hypermaterials into powerful explosives. Through the groundbreaking paradigms included in the Enlightenment fruit, VS was able to contemplate the premise of turning superdimensional matter into the most powerful and compact explosive warhead possible. This was an insane idea but could theoretically work. It's not that simple, he said with a frown. Among the three mech designers, he possessed the greatest understanding of superdimensional technology. Only specific varieties of superdimensional matter can be used for this application, and they need to undergo extensive processing, alloying, and rearrangement before they can be turned into a powerful destructing construct. However, so long as you can solve all of these technical problems, a single mech-grade cannon shell can potentially inflict as much damage as the primary gun battery of a battleship. Gloriana grew enthused as she imagined all of the possibilities. We can attain the best results by using high-grade superdimensional matter. Their extra-dimensional characteristics are the strongest. We can design special ammunition and have them launch from a physical cannon wielded by one of our ace mechs. The combination of different enhancements can potentially allow one of our ace mechs to overwhelm the defenses of a particularly powerful greater phase whale. It might even be able to inflict injury on an ancient phase whale. VS was already thinking beyond that. What if he applied what he learned to develop an insanely potent superdimensional explosive shell for the destroyer of worlds? The Ragnarok could be able to launch a projectile that could inflict significant damage to another god mech. The attack may even be potent enough to wear down the defenses of a god king, though that may be wishful thinking on VS' part. Whatever the case, he fully recognized the potential in the knowledge he gained from an enlightenment fruit worth just 35 ascension points. The value of this enlightenment fruit may be accurately priced for ordinary mech designers, but for Larkin sons with enough knowledge of superdimensional technology and access to superdimensional matter, the actual gains were worth much more. Unfortunately, VS did not have the time or interest to explore the full potential of this new intersection of technologies. We should prepare an information package for Xanther, VS suggested. We shouldn't dump everything on his shoulders all at once. That is a bit too much. We should share the basics to him first and steadily grant him access to more advanced theories and designs. He would definitely love it and try to incorporate what he has learned into his own works. As the resident physical ammunition specialist of our clan, he is the best person to exploit the potential of this new tech. As the director of the design department, Gloriana carefully weighed his proposal. We can do this, but do not expect immediate results. Xanther is still an inexperienced journeyman. He will have to put more effort into learning and mastering the basics of superdimensional theory. We can speed up his studies if we give him access to samples of low-grade superdimensional matter. He should be able to experiment and understand superdimensional theory through actual practice rather than book learning. We have lots of low-grade superdimensional matter in storage. Kedis mentioned. This stuff is the equivalent of sand and dirt. The only reason why we haven't tossed it aside is because they happen to possess relatively modest superdimensional properties. It doesn't matter too much if they are not suited to be used as the basis of a self-exploding projectile. We can take advantage of their superdimensional properties to stuff in a larger quantity of exotics and hypers that are configured to explode with great force. Her suggestion had potential. It would still take a lot of trial and error to figure out a cost-effective way to develop superdimensional explosive munitions, but a mech designer such as Xanther should be able to puzzle it out in the next few years. There were many uses for low-grade superdimensional matter, but VS did not mind it if the clan used its vast reserves as the key ingredients for explosive ammunition. Compared to using this relatively abundant matter to construct fortifications, VS would much rather turn them into munitions that could drastically increase the firepower of his mechs and possibly his warships. VS Kedis and Gloriana continued to swap ideas about how to utilize the new knowledge. However, VS soon turned his attention back to his immediate problem. He had no time to explore those exotic ideas when he still had a leadership challenge on the horizon. Now that I am out of AP, let's head down to the wishing fountain. It's time for me to use up my remaining lottery tickets. He had made up his mind regarding this matter. The lottery tickets represented a lot of potential wealth, but continuing to hoard them when he clearly needed an extra boost did not make sense. Of course, that did not mean he was willing to use up his most precious radiant lottery ticket right away. He retrieved the 9 golden lottery tickets and intended to use them up first. If he managed to win the jackpot with one of them, then he might be able to keep the radiant lottery ticket in reserve for a while longer. Both Kedis and Gloriana watched with a mix of fascination and bemusement as VS tossed the first ticket into the well of the wishing fountain. The water began to light up in gold. Energy began to accumulate beneath the surface. When it finally reached a threshold, a message exploded in front of everyone's eyes. Congratulations! Regretfully, you have not won a prize this time. Thank you for your patronage. The female mech designers looked distinctly unimpressed. The system does this sometimes, VS awkwardly said as he looked embarrassed. Hopefully not all of the tickets will end up as duds. He repeated the process with another ticket. Come on, give me something good. This time the wishing fountain decided to oblige him and actually spat out an object. VS caught the object. It looked like a skull. A human skull. What is this? Gloriana briefly looked confused before her companion spirit sensed a remarkable amount of power locked inside. Wait, is this the skull of an ace pilot? What? Kedis had already figured it out before the other woman. She looked at the skull with a perplexed expression. It was a good thing the Heavensward did not decide to accompany her into the system space this time. She feared how it might react when faced with the skull of an honorable hero and saint. Not a lot of ace pilots have perished in combat since the start of the Red War, VS said as he held the skull with a bit of reverence. However, fatalities have risen ever since the Phase Lords have begun to employ St. Piercers on an increasingly larger scale in the past year. I will have to look up the archives and see if I can match a name to this particular specimen. What will you do if you find out that the ace pilot has family or people who cared about him, VS? Will you give them the skull so that they can bury him properly? Kedis softly asked. VS shook his head. No, I can't explain how I obtained this skull. Besides, the wishing fountain gave it to me in order to make something out of it. I can easily imagine that the ace pilot who this skull belongs to would approve of any plan of turning it into a weapon against his killers. If we can gain the cooperation of the skull architect, we can provide a powerful boost to one of our high-ranking mechs. He did not have any intentions of giving away such a valuable prize. This was a relic that was equivalent in value if not greater than a whole mentalist crystal. Although it was macabre to use the remains of an ace pilot as a resource for his works, VS truly could not resist the temptation. He readily succumbed to his weakness as a mech designer and had no thoughts about giving it back to the relatives of the deceased saint. Though Kedis did not quite agree with his decision, it was his skull, considering he used up his own golden lottery ticket to obtain this prize. After VS carefully stowed away the ace pilot skull, he proceeded to use up his remaining golden lottery tickets. Congratulations! Regretfully, you have not won a prize this time. Thank you for your patronage. Congratulations! You have won a set of weapon gauntlets called the Tiger's Claws. Congratulations! You have won the design schematics of the Herzog Red 115B edition. Congratulations! Regretfully, you have not won a prize this time. Thank you for your patronage. Congratulations! Regretfully, you have not won a prize this time. Thank you for your patronage. Congratulations! You have won a replica of the corrupting orb. Congratulations! Regretfully, you have not won a prize this time. Thank you for your patronage. As the wishing fountain continuously gobbled up the golden lottery tickets and glowed in gold, VS did not always obtain the desired results. Gloriana looked fairly impressed at VS' luck. Out of the 9 lottery tickets that you have used up, 5 of them yielded no prize at all. This must not have been a particularly good day. I wouldn't say so, Kedis said. That skull is probably worth at least 5 golden lottery tickets alone. It is a pity that it is not immediately useful to VS. Gloriana curiously picked up a pair of weapon gauntlets. Although they were merely low-level artifacts, they possessed a special charm that made them attractive to her. Their design was surprisingly elegant and delicate, making it clear that they were meant to be used by feminine users rather than masculine ones. Andraste would love them as a birthday present. She commented. Perhaps I should upgrade them like you have done with the flower parasol. VS looked dubious at this idea. They are low-level artifacts. You can probably make a better weapon set by developing it from the ground up with superdimensional matter. I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss the value of these tiger's claws. Just look at how beautiful they are. The more I look at them, the more I admire their visual design. There has to be more to these relics than what is apparent on the surface. While the claws represented a novelty, the other two prizes were a bit more interesting. All three mech designers quickly understood the value of the design schematics of the Herzog Red 115B edition. This is an extremely advanced first-class multipurpose mech design. Gloriana noted. In my view, it looks complete and legitimate. What is strange is that its technological refinement is unusually high. That is because it is a mech design from the cybernetic empire. VS stated with certainty. This design contains a wealth of advanced technological applications that are at least a generation ahead of the rest of Red humanity. The design itself is not necessarily valuable. What is truly interesting are the design solutions. If not for the fact that these files lack full documentation, we could easily master the underlying knowledge that allows this first-class multipurpose mech to perform so well. This was an unexpected bonus prize. Chapter 7158. Lucky Break. Chapter 7158. Lucky Break. When VS used up his golden lottery tickets, he completely did not aspire to get his hands on the valuable design files of a modern cyber first-class multipurpose mech design. Yet he obtained them anyway. All three mech designers quickly understood the strategic value of knowing how the design of the Herzog Red 115B edition was put together. It was a versatile machine that could fulfill a variety of functions better than the mechs fielded by the other top powers such as the Red Association, the Terran Alliance, and the Rebarthan Pact. When VS estimated the Herzog's performance with the Dracoloid and the Omega Thresher that had become a mainstay of the Premier Fleet, the former offered such superior all-round performance that he saw little point in fielding the latter two. Sure, the Dracoloid had its powerful flamethrower gimmick that enabled it to get an edge at close range. The Omega Thresher's long-range damage output and precision still exceeded that of the Cybermech. Yet the Herzog performed well enough in both close range and long range that the gaps with the more biased mech models had no longer become decisive enough to pick the latter over the former. The Premier Fleet could make its mech units more versatile and vastly simplify logistics by fielding one technologically superior first-class multipurpose mech model, rather than two outdated models. The technological superiority of the cybernetic empire was simply too great. The polymath and many different scientists and engineers had worked hard to push the boundaries of hard science and technology. The design files easily exposed hundreds, if not thousands, of small innovations that could have only been attained through one or two mech generations of focused research. This was the reason why the cybernetic empire guarded its tech so much. The polymath clearly understood how much further she was ahead compared to the other human powers, and she also knew how easy it was to lose this massive technological lead if the wrong tech or designs got leaked. This was why the Cybers had taken great care in isolating Bridgehead 1 from the rest of Red humanity. They even went as far as maintaining their own separate galactic net, though they called it by a different name. What VS just obtained through a random golden lottery draw essentially shattered the cybernetic empire's painstaking effort. Although the design files did not go in depth enough in the science and proof that delivered specific design applications, it should be easy enough for researchers to reverse engineer the theoretical backing that could produce consistently superior solutions. This mech design is wasted in our hands, Gloriana mentioned. As interesting as it is to get our hands on a mech design that looks as if it should be published 2 mech generations in the future, we lack the expertise and personnel to reverse engineer it by ourselves. It is best to leave this job to the professionals, and I can think of no better party than the Red Association. Perhaps we should approach the mech supremacist faction in particular, given that it should hold the greatest interest in what we have obtained. Offering the design files to the mech supremacists first can also be considered a reward for all of the help and goodwill that they have extended to us. If we do this quickly enough, we can exchange for valuable goods or tech that you can use to upgrade your dueling gear even further. Her suggestion sounded compelling. It felt a bit of a shame to give up this technological advantage, but it was not as if the Larkin Sons could start producing Herzog without generating a lot of questions from the Cybers and all of the other parties. Besides, VS knew extremely well that the information security of the Larkinson clan was pathetic in the face of a star designer who specialized in networks. As soon as the Larkinsons started to fabricate the Herzog on an industrial scale, the major players would soon get their hands on the copies of the design files. Rather than let all of these groups obtain a cutting-edge mech design for free, it was better for the Larkinson clan to share it in a private trade for guaranteed concessions. What do you think, Keddies? People will still wonder how we managed to get our hands on these sensitive design files, she said with a frown. The cybernetic empire may mistakenly believe that we are spying on them and that we happen to be successful in stealing sensitive data from them. What if they assume that what we reveal is only a fraction of what we managed to smuggle out of their isolated star system? The Swordmaster was right to worry about the reactions from different parties. The Larkinsons already violated a rule by possessing these design files. They would violate even more CE laws if they proliferated the design files in exchange for profit. After all, the Herzog was a cyber mech design. It did not belong to the Larkinsons. The The cybernetic empire would definitely accuse the Larkin sons of fencing stolen goods or whatever. It was better to shove this problem to the Red Association and let the meshers figure out how to solve this mess. Of course, VS also thought about obediently handing over the information to the cybernetic empire, but he and the Larkin sons had little reasons to do so. The cybers would not appreciate this gesture. They would likely react with hostility and grow enormously suspicious towards the Larkin sons. The relationship between VS and the polymath was complicated to say the least. They were not enemies, but they were not friends either. He knew that the polymath sought to enter into secret negotiations with the Oblivion Gate Consortium in order to become a member of the first true transgalactic organization. The problem was that it was difficult to believe that this honorless and extremely rational woman had any pure motives in mind. If VS could come up with the suspicion that the polymath wanted to steal the designs of the Oblivion Gates and erect her own transportation network between the old galaxy and New Frontier, then his mother would most definitely develop the same suspicion as well. Whether the polymath would become an ally of convenience or not depended on whether the Oblivion Gate Consortium would still be able to earn a hefty profit regardless if the star designer betrayed the organization at a later date. All of this was way too complicated to VS. He fully wished Cynthia and the evolution which luck in their attempts to wrangle with the polymath. We should refrain from disturbing the cybernetic empire, VS advised. Working with the meshers is safer and more convenient. We can trust them to honor their commitments, and they will not harbor any hard feelings towards us by trading goods acquired through irregular means. That was not quite true either. It depended on which group or faction of meshers the Larkin sons approached. Still, VS could at least rely on the greed and obsessions of the mech supremacists to pay a hefty price in exchange for the design files of the Herzog. After they initially figured out on what they should do with the unexpected windfall, they finally directed their attention towards the final prize delivered by the system. This doesn't look like a corrupting orb. It looks like a cube. Kedys stated the obvious. That is because it is a container, more specifically one that can completely isolate the passage of energy, including E-energy radiation. Gloriana informed the other two. It is remarkably effective at its job. We can use it to store other dangerous objects if we no longer need to contain this so-called corrupting orb. Well, that confirms that whatever it is, this object poses a threat towards others. We should be careful about opening this container. Anything that is called a corrupting orb is most definitely not a trivial item. VS nodded in agreement. Even though the container prevented him from peeking inside, he already had a hunch that its contents were dangerous. The same hunch also told him that this may be the most valuable prize he obtained from his golden lottery tickets today. Let us set up a few precautions, he suggested. They did just that. They used the irregular landscape of the mountaintop to place the container in a shallow ravine. The three mech designers moved further away and made sure that there was plenty of solid cover to shelter behind. They also made sure they were situated at least 50 meters away from the container. Open it, VS. VS mustered up a small measure of his spatial abilities and physically unlatched the mechanism that kept it closed. As soon as the top of the container slid open, a dark purple orb became visible. The orb was slightly smaller than a human head, but not by much. It appeared completely smooth and even reflective, showing a distorted mirror of its immediate surroundings. While the orb looked mysterious and alluring, it also radiated dangerous energies into the environment. VS could feel that it was transmitting a mixture of darkness energy and energy corresponding to other negative attributes. What are you doing, VS? Stay here. It is not safe for you to get close. Well, maybe Kedys will be fine. Kedys studied the orb with a critical expression before she reluctantly nodded. My willpower shall protect me from this artifact. And I. You don't have a good way to mitigate the negative influence from this object, VS told his wife. It is called the corrupting orb for a good reason. He ignored her complaints and approached the exposed orb. Kedys quietly followed suit. Her steps were slower and a bit more guarded, as if she was ready to bolt if the orb tried to lash out or anything. Fortunately, the artifact remained completely passive. It did not generate any special reactions towards the two individuals that had stepped close. VS faintly paid attention to Gloriana. He was afraid that she may prove stubborn and get close regardless of the warnings she received. Fortunately, she showed a bit of good sense and remained safely in the distance. As VS and Kedys drew close enough to the open container, they looked down and regarded the orb with a mix of vigilance and intrigue. This is a weapon artifact. Kedys formed an initial conclusion. It is no sword or spear. It is more akin to a source of contamination in a hand-portable form. Anyone who can harness this evil artifact can use it to fuel dark spells and channel its corrupting energies towards enemies. The foul energies radiated by the orb likely doesn't cause any physical damage, but they can probably bypass any form of defense and inflict mental and spiritual damage, which is hard to guard against. Hard to guard against by anyone except willpower cultivators such as you. VS responded with a wry smile. This orb is probably doing nothing but irritating your mind and spirit. With sharpest protection you can easily remain incorruptible. No high-ranking mech pilot will succumb to the influence of this orb. They are just too good at resisting these kinds of attacks. You are not doing so bad either, VS. Your growing dark streak comes in handy this time. You look as if you are about to harmonize with this artifact. VS responded with a wordless nod. He could not deny his attraction to an artifact that seemed a lot more compatible with him than the ocean collar and the flower parasol. Had the system finally given him a lucky break? This artifact may also be the perfect weapon to employ against all of those ascended giants. Kedis continued to share her thoughts. From what I have learned, phase lords do gain a measure of superhuman mental resilience, but not nearly enough to match their growth in physical stature. Their spiritualities should be far more vulnerable than their massive bodies. Their spatial barriers may help them block most attacks, but the dark energies released by this corrupting orb should be harder to impede, just like other forms of E-energy. You may be able to rely on this artifact to defeat the leaders of the Phase Lord Department from an unexpected angle. Thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Join the Mech Touch's unofficial Discord server. https://discord.gg/apb5kcu. Chapter 7159. The Corrupting Orb Mass Release Day, February 5th. Chapter 7159. The Corrupting Orb Mass Release Day, February 5th. After studying the corrupting orb from a short distance for a few minutes, VS finally decided to take a chance. He bent down and carefully grasped the orb in his hand. It felt smooth and cold to the touch. VS felt as if he held an orb of ice in his hands. He could already feel a bit of his body warmth siphoning away from his palms. If he was a regular human, then he risked freezing his hands if he kept hold of the orb long enough. As a human phase lord, the tiny amount of warmth passing from his body was trivial to the point where he could ignore it entirely. Interesting. Direct contact with the orb drastically magnified its corrupting influence. Already he could feel much of the darkness energy and other negative energies pouring straight into spirituality. It was as if the orb eagerly wanted to punish the individual that was foolish enough to grab hold of its form. Mro. However, much of the negative energies failed to affect VS in any obvious manner. His darkness affinity meant that he did not feel any repulsion towards the darkness spewed by the corrupting orb. VS could even feel that he could absorb the darkness so long as he was willing to put in the hard work of digesting it and putting his own imprint on the energy. However, he was not completely immune to the other negative energies. Strange impulses of sadness, anger, disgust, irritation, and so on began to affect his mood as the corrupting orb tried to suppress his positive traits while amplifying his negative traits. It was only due to his strong spirituality, his high alertness, and his excellent mental resilience that he was able to keep most of the detrimental influence at bay. Even then, VS was disappointed to find out that he was not completely immune to these effects. If they affected him long enough, he would lower his guard sooner or later. Momentary exposure to this orb should not be dangerous to me, he concluded. Other people may behave irrationally when exposed to its contamination, but as long as they are removed quickly enough, the effects shouldn't be permanent. What if the exposure is more prolonged? Gloriana asked as she still stood in the distance. Then they may irrevocably become changed or rather corrupted by this orb. He answered in an ominous tone. It is difficult to recover from the damage that this artifact can do. Only time, therapy, and family can heal such scars. And if the orb keeps corrupting its victims? Can it actually kill people after they have become exposed long enough? She wondered. VS thought about it. He could roughly estimate how it could affect ordinary folk by measuring how it affected him and Blinky. He could roughly foresee that the mind and spirit would become increasingly more contaminated with darkness and negativity. Everything positive and neutral would get damaged or squeezed away, allowing the corrupting orb's malevolent energies to claim more ground. When the saturation of those evil energies reached 100%, no human would be able to remain the same anymore. They had changed in such a fundamental way that they could no longer be called human anymore. Yet that didn't necessarily mean they died at that point. VS could very well foresee a scenario where they would still live on as evil entities as opposed to normal humans. He suddenly became reminded of a type of entity that was entirely comprised of negative energies. Demons! VS gasped as he looked at the corrupting orb in a new light. This can be used to convert living subjects into demons through prolonged exposure. It is like employing the soul whip but on an automatic basis. The soul whip technique that VS acquired from enlightenment allowed him and his eldest sister to convert captive souls of humans and aliens into demons. However, this was a very tedious process. Helena certainly did not appreciate the need to allocate a significant part of her attention and power to whipping harvested souls into demons that were filled with hatred and other negative thoughts. This was a necessary step to produce the minor demons needed to produce more powerful variants with the help of the demon mixers. If VS and Helena began to make use of the corrupting orb, then they may be able to automate this process, allowing them to churn out a stable output of minor demons which could subsequently be put into the demon mixers to undergo ritualistic goo cultivation. So long as VS created more demon mixers, he could scale up the production of higher quality demons, thereby enabling him to produce a greater quantity of Dmeks and Dharms. This orb is not that powerful, he said as he eyed it with a critical gaze. It is clearly made to be used at an infantry scale. It doesn't look like I can make it larger like the Ocean Caller. This means that its potency is limited if I attempt to use it against a phase lord. You sound dissatisfied, Kedis said. Not at all. I am just pointing out a limitation. I am actually really satisfied with it, even if it may not necessarily be useful in our current situation. This corrupting orb can greatly facilitate my demon casting work. Besides, I can still use it as a weapon if I am willing to take a few risks. For example, I can use it as an extraordinary power source for a larger weapon or mech. There is no rule that forces me to use the orb as a standalone artifact. It actually seems rather underwhelming this way. Gloriana nodded in agreement. I have been entertaining the same ideas. The Phobos can become a much more powerful machine if we embed this into the machine. If you can channel its energies into the Geist system, you can drastically increase the potency and the growth rate of the expert mech's iconic fiends. Although the combination sounded attractive, VS held the orb in a possessive grasp. No. I do not deny that the two are a good match, but there is only one corrupting orb. If I have a spare, then I would not hesitate to figure out how to best integrate it into the Phobos Mark II design, but for now this one is mine. I have too many uses for this orb. Besides, it is not necessarily the case that it will only remain useful at the scale of ordinary humans. If I was able to upgrade and reinvent the flower parasol, I should be able to do the same with this orb. The only difficulty is that I am not entirely sure how to do so, considering that this is a giant spherical crystal that appears to be made up of a single hole. It may very well be that the entire artifact comprised of just a single mysterious hard crystal. That made it a lot more difficult for him to tinker with it. Creating an opening or cutting it in pieces risked destroying the artifact entirely. He needed to obtain a lot more information and expertise before he gathered enough confidence to tinker with the corrupting orb. For the time being, VS decided to keep it as a self-contained unit. While he could still slot it into larger constructs, he ruled out any suggestions that threatened the integrity of the spherical crystal. VS, Kedis, and Gloriana began to swap a number of ideas on how to leverage the properties of the corrupting orb into other equipment. I have a feeling that combining the effects of a corrupting orb with the effects of a mentalist crystal can produce powerful synergies. Gloriana said, I can feel my cranial implant suite reacting more violently to it than Alexandria, and that is from a distance. That sounded like an interesting idea. We don't have a spare mentalist crystal though. Perhaps we can try our luck and see if the Red Association or Red Collective is willing to donate one, but I seriously doubt it. Those mentalist crystals tend to get used up quickly before anyone can steal it from their possession. It was rather ridiculous how extensively it became accepted practice for different groups to steal each other's mentalist crystals. This also fueled a lot of urgency among their owners. They tried their best to use up the crystals as quickly as possible. They needed to make it so that it became impossible to salvage the precious hypermaterials once they became embedded into other products. I do not think it is a good idea to integrate it into one of your self-exploding spears, Kedis said. Since you clearly want to retain possession of it, maybe it is better to embed it into your raiment or another piece of gear such as a physical shield. This way you can gradually douse the enemy human phase lords with harmful radiation. Even if they are aware of what you are doing, they have no good answers because it isn't a regular weapon of mass destruction. VS could see the merit of this idea. Even if the corrupting orb is a little weak when used against ascended giants, it can still influence the latter in increasingly more severe ways. Those phase lords will become more prone to irrational outbursts. Their negative emotions will hold more sway. Their discipline will crumble. The duelists will start to make mistakes, and that will give the Dark Apostle more options to turn a losing battle around. Although it seemed dishonorable to weaponize the corrupting orb in this manner, VS did not have the luxury to deny a weapon that could potentially deliver him victory. He needed to think on how he could amplify its effects. The current level of passive radiation was nice and all, but if he wanted to corrupt a phase lord to the point of fighting like a mindless berserker, then he clearly needed to amp up its power. VS already had an idea or two on how he could accomplish this. He needed to consult with Helena and possibly his mother if he was willing to entertain her son. After he completed his initial examination of the orb, he carefully placed it back into its original container. Everyone breathed a little easier now that the orb was safely locked inside its isolating box. Gloriana moved over while maintaining a vigilant expression towards the closed container. Normally I would advise you to avoid working with such a dangerous object, but we can't afford to be picky, he said as he moved over and wrapped an arm behind her back. I am confident that I can handle it. I know you have opinions about playing with dangerous energies, but I already have a certain degree of experience with this. I know what I am doing. With Blinky at my disposal, I can easily handle any dangerous discharge of harmful energies. The orb will not be able to corrupt me in the slightest. His wife was still skeptical, but she was willing to place her trust in him. If you say so. Now that you have gained a number of valuable prizes, are you still in the mood to draw the Radiant Lottery ticket? VS had to think hard on this question. The golden lottery tickets had indeed yielded better prizes than expected when they actually spat out more than empty platitudes. However, none of the prizes granted him the skills or the hard power he needed to reliably defeat not one but multiple ascended giants in the dueling ground. I still feel that my fighting skills are too rudimentary to measure up against professional soldiers and warriors, he eventually said. I do not think I have a choice. None of the golden lottery tickets yielded an appropriate enlightenment fruit, so I can only place all of my hopes into my final ticket. Let's all hope that I can get what I want this time. Thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Join the Mech Touch's unofficial Discord server. https://discord.gg/apb5kcu. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.